Chapter 1. There was about 20 meters from West Point buildings to the Great Western Bank on Great Western Street. From Dillon Thomas's apartment, there was a clear view from his third-floor window to the oak front doors of the bank. His room was your standard bachelor pad. TV, music system, video selection of modern to old classic tunes, two-seated sofa, and glass coffee table. This was rented property from his landlord, Mr. Maltesa, one moaning son of a bitch. And things were not going to look good when he was to tell him that he was going to have to put his rent check on hold for another month, since losing his job at the taxi rank through no fault of his own, but because of a misunderstanding between him and his boss. Dillon had been working his ass off for his overweight, out-of-shape boss, Sam Kane. He was the hardest person you could ever work with. Putting in overtime for him was your own prerogative and for your own benefit. There was no appreciation from him. Dillon wasn't the only one who had been fired recently. About a week before Dillon was fired, they had an illegal immigrant working down at the rank, although it was against the law. Kane fired him for a misplacement of $10, which was a bit over the top as these things happen all the time. But Kane got a kick out of it. The guy was expendable, and the work was getting slack according to him. Dillon worked nights as well as days, driving the streets, picking up an assortment of people ranging from $40 hookers to high-class businessmen, and sometimes both together. One unfortunate night, he picked a guy up from the slums in downtown Los Angeles, jobs he did not enjoy whatsoever. The guy turned out to be high on crack and pulled a gun out on Dillon, threatening him for the takings. After a 2-minute struggle with the bum, 2 shots rang out. One of the bullets tore through Dillon's left shoulder, sending extreme pain through his body. The second bullet shot straight through the windshield. The bum managed to escape and dashed into the night with the takings in hand. Dillon lay bleeding and in shock until the paramedics arrived an hour later, after a passerby dialed 911 from his cell phone. He was out of action for 3 weeks after the incident. That's when Kane employed a temp during his recovery. When Dillon was ready for return to work, he got a call from Kane with a lame excuse, telling him his work was going downhill before the accident and he was going to have to let him go. He accepted Kane's lies as there was lack of work at the rank. This incident gave Kane the perfect excuse for Dillon's expulsion. He wasn't going to take this one lying down, and quickly after filed for unfair dismissal. His lawyer told him his case was going to be a lengthy one, as all employment cases were. Dillon tried searching L.A. for more cab work, the only work he knew due to bad schooling. The search was no good. The only available work in the city was your usual cafe, restaurant, chump jobs with lower wages. But with little of his pride still left intact, he did not want to lower himself any further. He decided he'd wait and hold out for the right opportunity to arise. But who could tell when that would be? Depression had now set in a regular appointment. Anyway, that was then, this was now. And Dillon needed to find other cab work quickly before Maltesa was to start throwing the eviction notice in. Mr. Mario Maltesa had been Dillon's landlord for the last 2 years. 2 years of hell. A major pain in his ass. He had fallen behind a couple of weeks with the rent, as per usual, and had been playing hide-and-seek with Maltesa for the past week, ignoring the front door, running for the stairs when he was coming out of the elevator, but it could not go on for much longer. Dillon was going to have to get the money to him one way or another. Otherwise, his belongings would be on the street. Heartless goddamn landlords, they were all the same. Maltesa owned West Point, plus another block down the road, with 16 flats in West and 16 in the other block. He was making some serious money. Maltesa's lifestyle mainly consisted of smoking Havana cigars, eating TV dinners. He dressed like a tramp with $12 shoes, cheap shirts, ties, and trousers, and not forgetting his Medicare spectacles, the guy was prehistoric. Dillon could not understand why a guy with so much wealth had to live like a tramp. Maltesa's apartment was on the ground floor, nicely situated next to the garbage closet, and was no palace. A few weeks previous, Dillon had to call on his apartment about the plumbing in his own. When Maltesa answered, Dillon was hit with an indescribably pungent odor that seemed to be drifting from behind his door. The only light that flicked from the far end of the room was that of the TV. Maltesa stood there in a string vest, nicotine-colored Y-fronts, white socks and sandals, complete with cigar in mouth and a pair of chicken legs. A sight bad enough to turn you blind. Dillon explained his problem. Maltesa said he would get round to it. He wasn't happy with the answer from Maltesa, but agreed to it only because he was gagging with the foul-smelling whiff coming from beyond. After Maltesa closed his door, Dillon made a dash for the main doors of the building, swung them open, and took in a great gasp of fresh air. His face, distorted as he exhaled, was noticed by a passing police officer. The officer looked at Dillon in a mystified manner. Dillon changed his grimace to a friendly smile and waved over to the officer. The officer, expressionless, nodded his head as he walked on by. Dillon thought to himself, I need to avoid that landlord rat as much as I can in the future, for health reasons as well as the rent. It was another scorcher of a day, pushing at least 78 degrees, as Dillon walked into his small but kind of spacious kitchen. He opened his camper refrigerator and grabbed some cheese, ham, and mayo, plus a cold beer. He made up a sandwich and lazily looked down onto the street below. The growling sound of cars and buses that midday Thursday afternoon rose in volume as Dillon pulled open the window. Heat rushed in like a backdraft, filling his room with the warm-smelling odor of fast food joints mixed with a hint of vehicle fumes. People marched up and down the street like ants back to the nest. 2 children seemed to be laughing and joking at a younger child who had lost the top of his ice cream. The child was trying to scoop up the melting yellow liquid from the hot sidewalk while sobbing in the process. 2 other children were engaged in a game of hopscotch. Dillon turned his head to the sound of a bus's air brakes and a guy in a Ford convertible honking his horn at a drunk trying to cross at the lights after they had turned green. Oblivious, the drunk staggered on. The chain of traffic proceeded to move. Dillon noticed an advert on the side of a passing bus which he thought was impeccably timed for the type of day. It read, "Charm your throat with the taste of a Coke." A bikini-clad woman lay on her side, caressing the bottle, which looked deliciously ice-frosted, and to his own imagination, it seemed to be held in an unnecessarily lewd manner. He gave a sigh, took a bite from his sandwich, chewed, swallowed, and then took a sip of beer to wash it down. Dillon took out a cigarette, lit it, and inhaled deeply and luxuriously before exhaling the smoke out of the window. It headed left and dispersed out of view. He glanced across the road and noticed that Jack's store had had a new facelift. The large pine windows had had a lick of red paint over them that made the store look cheap against the Great Western Bank's silvery steel-looking walls and large polished oak doors. Jack's store looked like an old shack by comparison, but Jack was not one to care about his own appearance, never mind his shop. Dillon noticed one of his neighbors, Miss Lyons, cross the street back to her apartment from the bank, 2 empty cash bags in hands. She ran her own beauty business from home and lived on the same floor as Dillon. From time to time, he took upon her services, which were totally above board, although Dillon could tell that she had once or twice thought about using his own techniques in the bedroom department. But he felt that she wasn't his type. Although Miss Lyons was good-looking, there was no doubting that. She had that look of Marilyn Monroe about her, but not the dress sense. Hers was more business suits, tight-fitting skirt and blouse. She looked up and waved. Dillon waved back as she entered the apartment main door. He went back to the refrigerator, cracked open another beer, and continued his observations on Great Western. As he watched Great Western Bank, he noticed a security truck pull up about a foot or two opposite the bank doors. This security truck procedure Dillon had witnessed a few times whilst driving the cab. He rarely took notice, as he was more busy with talking to the clientele he chauffeured, never giving much interest for him until now. His mind was more occupied. He glanced at his watch. The time was 4:25 p.m. He watched observantly as two guards alighted from the truck, both holding in each hand large cases. The guards both entered the bank at exactly 4:30 p.m. Dillon was halfway through his second beer as the guards made their way back to the truck 15 minutes later. They were out of sight for a second or so, hidden behind the right-hand side of the truck. When they returned once more to the bank, cases in hand, he took the last mouthful of his beer and placed it on the windowsill. The guards, now back in the truck, pulled away from the sidewalk as Dillon read the sign writing on the side of the truck. It read, Hawk West Security, and a serial number, 8321. Beswickville was the crummy village Dillon had grown up in. He was brought up by just his mother after his father left. Being parents at a young age drove them to constant arguments and the odd plate-throwing escapade. This parental rivalry caused the split and a divorce when Dillon was 5 years old, leaving his mother to cope with just a part-time job with a low wage, receptionist for a phone company. During the day, Dillon was left with his grandparents, who lived close by. Once Dillon's mother had finished her work for the day, she would return always looking worse for wear to take care once more of her problem child that was Dillon. His brutishness was probably excused due to the estranged father he had. The years went by with the usual childish pranks every kid performs, with a little extra included. Expulsion from school for fighting, and accidents with enough blood over the years to fill a bathtub. He decided to leave home at the age of 16 when Mom and Dad decided to remarry. His memory from his early age was enough for him to get the hell out of there before the upset started again. He decided to move to West Point. Dillon looked at his watch again. It read 5:04 p.m. He was suddenly startled out of his observations by the sound of the telephone. He picked it up. Hello, Dillon speaking.
Hi, Dillon, it's Amy.
Amy, Dillon's sister, was 24, 3 years younger than him. He and Amy had been separated after the divorce between their parents. The courts gave a ruling of a child each, and Amy went with their father. Hey, said Dillon. How's everything?
Okay, and you?
Not too good.
Okay, tell me your problems,
said Amy. I got fired at the rank.
Is that all? It was a shit job anyway,
said Amy in an it's not the end of the world kind of tone. Yeah, but it paid the rent, said Dillon.
You'll find something else. Anyway, me and Peter are going to the Dome tonight. Got 3 tickets and a couple of pills. Up for it?
Said Amy. Peter Fisher was Amy's boyfriend from high school. Yeah, might as well drown my sorrows and break away from reality for one night, said Dillon.
Great. I'll pick you up at around 8:30 p.m., okay?
No, save yourself a journey. I'll come over on my bike, stay there tonight, then I can ride home in the morning, said Dillon.
Fine, I'll see you later then.
Okay, said Dillon. The conversation ended. He took a wander around his apartment, cleaning up the detritus from the night before. One more of his late-night self-pity booze binges. Beer cans, packets of empty chips wrappers all over the place. Gotta pull myself together, Dillon thought. He ejected the video from the VCR and decided to take it back across the road to Jack's. Walking down the corridor toward the stairs, he stopped outside one of his neighbor's doors and eavesdropped on what sounded like a good argument. You go out all night and you don't come home till 4:30 a.m. What am I supposed to think? Hey! A typical man-wife argument. Dillon was startled as the door facing burst open. Miss Lyons took a step back slightly, shocked to Dillon's presence.
Eavesdropping, are we, Dillon?
Said Miss Lyons. Shh! Couldn't help it. Sounded like a juicy argument. And besides, I wanted to know the reason for all that racket last night.
Yeah, I heard it too. Anyway, mustache. People to see, places to go. said Miss Lyons. Yeah, see ya, said Dillon, as he himself made his way out of the building and across to Jack's shop. He crossed in between the heavy traffic and made his way in. Hi, Jack, said Dillon. Jack nodded back, engrossed in his crossword book. Standing behind a shop counter all day played havoc with the man's boredom. Jack was half Indian American. Dillon put the rental video cassette on the counter and took a stroll around the shop. He took a small shopping basket with him. Stock up a little, he thought. He needed a few things, seeing as though takeaway foods were too much of an expense right now with the lack of cash. He watched a couple of old women discuss the price of some selected cat food. Dillon smiled to himself as he placed some microwave dinners into the basket and headed for the checkout. Jack rang Dillon's goods into the cash desk, not taking his eye off the magazine he was reading. He bagged up his goods and headed back to the apartment. He put away his stuff, switched on the TV, watched a couple of afternoon chat shows and an afternoon weepy movie, the kind of drama where family loses son in hospital coma situation. He drifted into a deep sleep after losing interest in the movie. Around 7:45 p.m. that same evening, Dillon woke from his scattered sleep, yawned and got up. He then shuffled to his bedroom, scattered a few pieces of clothing onto the bed, threw a pair of pants, a shirt and shoes into his rucksack, grabbed his bike helmet, hit his room light and headed out of the front door. He twisted the key in the lock and turned to head for the stairs. And there he stood with a walking stick in one hand and a cigar in the other. Ah, Mr. Maltesa, said Dillon. So, said Malty, Dillon's pet name for him. The name also matched the tone of his 54-year-old skin. Yes, I know it's payday, said Dillon. That's right. It's way over payday, said Malty, puffing a cloud of cigar smoke into Dillon's eyes, causing him to cringe with the foul fumes. I'll get the check to you first thing in the morning, said Dillon as he pushed past Malty. It's tomorrow, or you're on the streets. You're already a month behind, Malty cursed, waving his walking stick behind Dillon. Yes, sir, replied Dillon sarcastically, putting on an army corporal's voice. He was already halfway down the staircase as Maltesa's voice was fading away. He opened the exit to the front of the building, put on his helmet, and straddled his bike, which was outside the door. His pride and joy, what he had saved hard for over the years. The machine could push a speed of nearly 150 miles per hour, but he rarely chanced this. His trips on his bike mainly consisted of riding to the supermarket, which is more cheaply priced than Jack's 7-Eleven and also a better choice of supplies, or over to his sister Amy's house. Neither was more than 3 miles away, so the full power of the machine was never really pushed. Western Street was now quiet. Only Jack's store gave the street a morsel of life. The streetlights were in full glow and illuminating the sidewalks with a kind of circular spotlight effect. Dillon turned the keys in the ignition of the bike. It started with an adrenaline-rushing roar. He twisted the accelerator with attitude and sped off toward Amy's house. Hitting the highway, he sped up the bike. He was running low on gas, so he pulled into the service station about a mile from Amy's. He slowed to a stop, took off his helmet, opened the bike's gas cap, and began to fill it with super premium unleaded. He looked over to the pay desk where a good-looking blonde was working the register, attending to a customer. She had the look of a girl he once used to date a few years previous, Sarah. Dillon's mind wandered for a few seconds to the time he was holidaying in Greece. They were dining at a restaurant with an open-top roof on a warm August night. Conversation was flowing perfectly when Dillon excused himself to use the bathroom. On his return, he had found that a Greek guy was trying all the tricks in the book to impress Dillon's date. He calmly walked over without saying a word, put down some cash for the price of the meal, took hold of Sarah's hand, gave the guy a smile, and walked out of the restaurant. He thought that it was a much cooler approach than violence, and he knew Sarah was thinking the same due to the kiss he received afterwards. The relationship only lasted for a year after that because of the job offer she had received overseas. He didn't blame her, as it was the chance of a lifetime. They wrote to each other from time to time, but the letters soon dried up, and they drifted apart soon after. Dillon snapped from his dreaming as he heard a splash of petrol lap onto the floor. He replaced the petrol pump and strolled to the door to enter the service station. He took a look at the bookshelf that caught his eye on the way to the pay desk. He picked up a copy of Tough Bikes, flicked to the center page, and admired one of his favorite models, a Ducati 916-98 model. Glanced at the price and shut the magazine sharply, replacing it back to the rack with a sigh. He walked to the counter and noticed that the girl's resemblance to Sarah was not that close after all. $12, said the girl. Both sets of eyes met for a brief second. Thanks, said Dillon, handing the cash over. He turned to head back out. The girl shouted to Dillon, "You heading back up the highway?" "Yeah," replied Dillon. "Oh well, take care. There's been an accident about a mile up there." "Okay, thanks for the warning. See ya." "Yeah, see ya," said the girl, lazily chewing gum. Dillon put his helmet back on, started the bike, and set off once more on the route to Amy's. He drove up the slip road that joined the highway from the service station, carefully checking his wing mirror. It was clear, so he clicked down a gear and boosted off. Slipping through the gears neatly, he glided into the far lane. The night air was beginning to become very thick and humid as he cruised down the highway. Glancing to the side of the road, he noticed a sign which read, "Moss View, 2 miles, Route 82. Dillon increased the bike's speed to 80 miles per hour. The trees, signs, and road barriers seemed to flash by like an old black and white projector film. The road beneath him slid away at an alarming rate. The white lane separation line seemed to fuse into one long stripe. The moonlight shimmered on the far side of the highway, lighting up Moss View Lake, giving the moon a perfect mirrored image to the picture-still lake. Swans lay totally still as though anchored to the water, and the fields beside it were pitch black against the surrounding trees. Another sign, covered in graffiti, appeared with 1 mile to Moss View. A vehicle about 200 yards away in front had its hazard lights flashing. Adjacent to this car was a banner which read, "Police, reduce speed now." Dillon immediately dropped gears, and the vroom of the engine screamed down to a lower speed of 15 miles per hour as he passed the accident scene the girl in the station had told him about. It was quite gruesome. It looked as though a truck had jackknifed. The front end of the truck's carriage had tucked and folded under the barrier in a tangled wreck, and a car had somehow gone straight under the trailer, taking off the roof of the car completely. 2 firefighters seemed to be trying to free the girl. A pool of blood ran from the wreck like some sort of abstract art. The guy from the truck was being stretchered into the awaiting ambulance. Dillon turned from this horrid scene and increased his speed again on the highway, speeding through the night with the thoughts of a plan he had dreamed up earlier in the day. A feeling of weariness overwhelmed him. The accident behind him faded out and became a distant memory.
Chapter 2. Dillon arrived at Amy's bungalow home in Moss View at around 8:15 p.m., pulled into the driveway, and alighted the motorcycle before pushing it into the garage behind Peter's Camaro. A very nice car. Company owned, Dillon thought in a jealous mood. He walked out of the garage along the driveway to the front door and rang the bell. Peter answered. "Hi, Dillon, come in." Amy stood in the hallway making some last adjustments to her dress in the mirror. She turned to give Dillon a hug. "All set?" said Amy. "Sure," said Dillon. Peter shouted from the kitchen, "Want a beer, Dillon?" "Please," he replied. "I thought maybe we could have a few drinks here, then go straight off to the Dome," said Amy. The Dome was Dillon's favorite club and also Amy's. Leading normal lives during the day, the Dome was a place to escape from reality,
where the drugs were in abundance. The dance music they both enjoyed was played loud, and all the day's stress was forgotten, and it was time to let your hair down. Thursday nights had always been ritual for Amy and Peter. No work on a Friday meant a perfect night's clubbing. Amy was especially excited tonight, as she always was when Dillon was around. They shared a very close bond. The Dome was not very far from Amy's, just a 10-minute drive to East Boulevard where the club was situated. Dillon nodded a simple yes to Amy and began to walk over to Peter in the kitchen. "Still feeling down about the job?" asked Peter with concern. "No, I'm over it now. Shouldn't be a problem finding another. You still guarding the bank?" replied Dillon quickly, as to change the subject from himself. "Yeah, still 9 to 5, stood at the big fucking oak doors. But mustn't complain, it pays the bills," huffed Peter. Both Peter and Dillon moved from the kitchen and sat down in the lounge with Amy. 2 hours of idle chit-chat and many drinks later, their taxi arrived. Dillon and Peter walked to the cab and got in while Amy locked up the house. "Well, if it isn't salty," said Dillon, unsurprisingly sarcastically. Andy Salt was Dillon's coworker at the rank. Work-wise, Dillon and Andy shared the cab. One would do nights while the other days, then alternate weekly. "How's that asshole Kane?" said Dillon. "Fat Man Kane? Your worst enemy?" "You know him, he doesn't change. Still smoking 60 a day, large as a whale and on the brink of death, if that makes you feel any better," said Andy. "It sure does," replied Dillon. Amy got in the back. "Okay, let's go," she said. "Where are we off, then?" said Salty. In unison, both Peter and Amy replied, "The Dome." They looked into each other's eyes and gave a loving smile, which made Dillon feel a little nauseous. The cab pulled away from Moss View and arrived at the Dome at 10:30 p.m. They got out of the cab and Dillon leaned into the driver's side to talk with Salty. "I need to speak with you in the next week. Are you still on the same phone number?" "Yeah, what's it about?" said Salty inquisitively. "I'll call you and let you know," said Dillon, jogging from the cab to catch up with Amy and Peter. Salty nodded to himself, then drove away. Peter, Amy, and Dillon reached the doors to the club. The thumping house music flooded onto the street. Dillon had a quick chat with the doorman. Being a regular to the club, he knew most of the door staff. After shaking his hand, Dillon, Peter, and Amy bypassed the large queue outside of the doors and made their way inside of the club. The music obliterated the sound of conversation. Strobe lights flickered, and the dance floor was alive with people of all ages dancing to the heavy beats. Amy and Peter headed towards the bar as Dillon spotted his friend Terry Piper. He walked over to him. "Hey, Terry," shouted Dillon. "Hey, how's it going?" replied Terry. "Not bad," said Dillon. Terry was dancing next to a good-looking girl. "I've got this one in the bag tonight," said Terry. "In your dreams," replied Dillon sarcastically. "You just wait and see," said Terry seriously. "What have you taken, Terry? You look out of your fucking head." "Just the one pill," said Terry with a mischievous smile. Amy arrived back and handed Dillon a beer and a pill and smiled at him. He looked at Amy with a naughty expression, but took it anyway. "You know who's in here tonight, don't you?" said Terry. "Who?" said Dillon. "Your love you long time, Carrie." "Shit," said Dillon. But in his mind he was pleased and knew who he wanted to go home with tonight. Carrie Walker had been his girlfriend for the past 4 years, but they had drifted apart due to the flame of love reducing to cinders, and plenty of arguments to boot. Since the split 6 months ago, their mutual agreement was to have an open relationship, and although this was a pretty good idea, Dillon still felt a lot of jealousy. The thought of some other man with her made him feel quite sick. The pill Dillon had taken was now starting to work its wonders. Everything seemed a little hazy, with a happy and "I'm the most popular guy in the world" feel to it. He walked over to where Carrie was standing at the other side of the club. As he walked over, his stroll felt as though he was dancing. His favorite tune pumped from the giant speaker system. He tapped Carrie on the shoulder. She was standing with a few of her friends, who seemed to smile at him, but with a mocking smile that seemed to say, "You asshole, we're all out to get you." The accompanying paranoia was obviously kicking in. "Hello, stranger. A phone call now and again would be nice," said Carrie in a typically sarcastic tone. "I know, I'm sorry. You know what I'm like." "Don't I just?" said Carrie knowingly. They chatted through the rest of the night toward closing time. Amy and Peter came over to join them. Amy took a glance at Dillon, then at Carrie, then back to Dillon. The look on Amy's face said it all. "Not again, Dillon. Will you ever learn?" "Me and Peter are leaving. What are you doing, coming or staying?" "I'm gonna stay a while. I'll go home tonight and pick up my bike in the morning, okay?" said Dillon. "Fine, I'll see you then," said Amy. Just as Carrie was about to say, "Goodbye, Amy," Amy turned on her heel and left with Peter, uninterested with greeting her. "So, my place or yours?" said Dillon in a cheesy tone. "Yours," said Carrie without hesitation. They left the club and began the walk to Dillon's flat. It was around 1:40 a.m. The Dome was ready for closing in 20 minutes or so it was a good idea to get out before the rush. The street looked like a ghost town. A cool breeze blew a Coke can rattling along the pavement. The air was thin with an icy chill to it. Dillon took off his coat and placed it around Carrie's shoulders as they headed towards West Point. "How was your night then?" Carrie smiled. "Okay. And yours?" "Great. You know me. I only live to party." There was a minute or two of comfortable silence. Carrie was the one to break that silence. "How long can we go on like this, Dillon?" "Like what?" replied Dillon, faking the issue. "You know what I mean. This relaxed, take-each-other-home routine," said Carrie. "Why? You don't like the idea anymore? I thought we had this conversation and agreed to—" Carrie interrupted. "I know we did, but it doesn't seem right. I don't know what you want, and I don't know whether I can let go of you altogether." "Well, why don't we give it another try?" said Dillon. "What, and let you hurt me again by telling me it's over and you don't love me anymore? I don't think I could take that again. It would completely break me," said Carrie sympathetically. "I think it could be different. I feel I've changed. We've just got to understand each other a little better, that's all," said Dillon. "Maybe we could, but we're going to have to see. Maybe just take things a little slowly at first, eh?" replied Carrie. "No problem," said Dillon, as he kissed Carrie gently on the forehead. They arrived at the front doors of West Point. Dillon put in his key and opened the door quietly. "Keep quiet. Maltese has been on my case this week about the rent again." "Dillon, I gave you money the other week for rent. What happened to that?" "I needed that for my bike. Now come on," said Dillon, diffusing a potential argument quickly. Carrie looked at Dillon with disappointment. They headed on up the stairs to his apartment. "I'll make some coffee," said Dillon as Carrie walked into his bedroom and slipped into one of his t-shirts. He watched as she took off her dress. Looking at her slender physique, he was instantly aroused. "The coffee can wait, I think," said Dillon. He took Carrie by the hand. They both slowly tumbled onto the bed. They had begun to caress each other as Dillon reached out with his hand and turned out the bedside lamp. He woke around 10:30 a.m. Carrie was sound asleep by his side. Dillon nursed his head, which felt as though he'd been hit with a hammer. He got out of bed, went to the kitchen, grabbed a couple of soluble aspirin, tossed them into a glass of cold water, and began to make coffee. He sat at the small breakfast bar in the kitchen and sipped the hot coffee. Carrie appeared from the bedroom, fully clothed. I've got to go. I have a few things to do today. Carrie gave Dillon a kiss on the forehead. Try giving me a call once in a while, Dillon, just to let me know you're still alive, said Carrie sarcastically. I promise, said Dillon unconvincingly as Carrie closed the front door behind her. Dillon went back to bed and lay on top of the sheets. He could still smell the sex from the night before. He felt he needed at least one more hour of sleep just to sort out his 10-ton headache and for his brain to function normally again. He slept soundly until around 12:30 when a knocking on his front door woke him. Still feeling a little groggy, Dillon opened it cautiously. Terry passed by Dillon into the apartment. I cannot believe that bitch, said Terry. Oh, and hello to you too, Terry, replied Dillon. I take her back to my place, I give her all my chat-up lines. It works, and hey presto, she's in between the sheets within a half hour. When I wake up in the morning, guess what? She's gone, and not only has she gone, but she's fucked off with my brand new Versace jeans with over $100 in them. But here's the best bit. The cheeky fucker made herself tea and toast before leaving. Now that pissed me off, I tell you, Dillon, seethed Terry. Well, that'll teach you not to take home strange women. Anyway, chill out and sit down. I've got something to tell you. I'll get you a beer. Dillon walked to the refrigerator in the kitchen. Terry, still mumbling to himself, turned on the music system with the volume low. Dillon sat down next to Terry and handed him the beer. Terry, I've got an idea how to make some real money. I'm listening, said Terry. Dillon rose from the couch and walked towards the window overlooking Great Western Street. See the bank down there? What about it? Said Terry. We're gonna rob it, said Dillon giddily. Terry stood up, walked over to the window, and looked down on the street below where the bank was, then looked at Dillon, who was staring at the bank. Tell me you're not serious. You want to break into that bank, said Terry, thrusting his finger toward the bank. No, not break into it. I'm talking about holding it up, corrected Dillon. Terry laughed. Yeah, with what? A couple of water pistols and a plastic sword? Mocked Terry. No, listen, you know Andy, said Dillon. Yeah, replied Terry. Well, he knows a guy who has got a load of old war guns. Maybe we could ask him if he'd sell us a couple, said Dillon. Is Andy already in on this heist? Said Terry with interest. No, nothing's sorted yet. What do you say? If I take a look at the situation, sort out the negatives from the positives, will you give it a go? Said Dillon. Let's see what you come up with, and I'll think about it, said Terry. Chapter 3. Dillon Thomas watched the bank all week. Each time the same ritual took place. Thursdays, there were 2 guards, 4 cases, and 2 trips. Dillon noticed that a change had taken place. The ID number on one of the trucks had changed from 8321 to 8320. That didn't bother him, but maybe it should have. Probably just routine, he thought. The following Thursday, Dillon decided to deposit a little cash and case the joint, so to speak. He headed downstairs, across the street, and entered the bank as the guards were on their way out for the first time to collect the second lot of cases. Peter was working the door, looking quite smart and cop-like in his uniform. Afternoon, Dillon, said Peter. Hi, Peter. Just gonna make a quick deposit into my savings account. You never know when you might need it. Dillon gestured with a couple of banknotes. Every penny counts, replied Peter. Dillon smiled and headed toward the teller's desk. Above the oak doors was a circular security camera, and to Dillon's right were 6 bank tellers' booths. 4 of them were open and 2 displayed the "Position Closed" sign on them. At the far end of the bank was a steel door. The guards passed Dillon while he waited in a queue of 3 people. They headed for the doors. There was a buzzing noise and an entry system at the side of the door with colored lights which turned from red to green. The guards entered and out of Dillon's sight. By this time, it was his turn at the teller's window. He looked past the brown-haired woman momentarily, who waited patiently for Dillon's request. He gazed to see the guards reappear, talking to someone who looked like the bank manager. He was dressed smartly in a suit and tie. In fact, the gentleman concerned wasn't the bank manager, but Tony Chino, a mobster on the payroll of the notorious Don Pablo Montano. Montano was one of the richest guys in California, with more money than people could dream of in their whole lifetime. One of his many business interests was a property company with an annual turnover exceeding $100 million. To all in the know, his real business was the importation of vast amounts of narcotics from Cuba. The property business was just a way of washing his drug money. Montano, his business partner Tom Vincent, and Chino were all very close friends. They grew up together in the same grubby districts of Medellin, Colombia. As kids, they used to run errands for the old-time gangsters. Montano had built his empire up from working the streets, since coming to the States in '87. A few cash for drug exchanges here and there, saving every penny, thinking of his future investment, which was Montano real estate. They lived the life of kings. He was praised wherever he went, especially the Blue Flamingo Club, which he owned on California Strip. Chino was in charge of this club, taking care of its day-to-day runnings. Tom Vincent had been the director, until the day Montano found out that Vincent was looking after his wife while he was away on business trips to Colombia. It was Chino who noticed this, and he soon let Montano in on it. He arranged to see Vincent down by the State River, a meeting place often used to do deals. The noise of the busy river muffled the sounds of conversation, making it impossible for the feds to eavesdrop. One chilly, misty night in November '99, Montano walked to the river's edge with Vincent, as Chino stood next to Montano's limousine, constantly checking over his shoulder for uninvited guests. The car headlights beamed, cutting through the night's mist, singling out himself and Vincent. The sound of a fishing trawler bellowed its horn in the distance. There were a few brief words before Montano reached into his full-length black leather coat and produced a Japanese high-precision katana samurai sword. With a swift maneuver, Montano hit clean through Vincent's neck. His body fell backwards, straight and rigid like a lumbered tree, and the severed head vanished before the lifeless corpse hit the muddy waterbank. Montano deftly turned and walked casually back to where Chino stood and handed him the sword and sheath. Montano then walked back to the body, lifted his foot, and slammed his heel into the chest, crunching the ribs. He hurled an array of foul language in a quiet but vicious tone under his breath. After at least 5 slams to the chest of Vincent's lifeless body, Montano then adjusted the collar on his shirt and walked slowly back to the limo, away from the bloody mess. Chino looked completely stunned and shocked, for a man of terrible violence himself. "Get this piece of dirt in the body bag and get him in the car. That motherfucker won't be fucking my wife anymore, and won't be talking to the feds," said Montano casually. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "Oh, and don't worry about the prick's head. It's rolled in the river. That'll teach him to screw around with my piece of ass." Montano seethed as he sat back in the limo. Chino was left to give the corpse a new home under the Californian desert. Dillon heard a distant voice. "Sir, can I help you?" said the teller with a smile. "Oh, sorry, I was miles away. Just a small deposit." He handed over $20. She wasn't particularly interested in the amount and started to make out the receipt. He could just see past the wall where the conversation between the guards and the manager was taking place, as a giant steel vault opened and both guards stepped in with the manager. "Thank you, sir," said the teller to Dillon. "Yeah, thanks," he replied, not noticing her flirtatious smile as he headed for the door. "Amy's just pulled up at your place," said Peter. "Okay, I'll get right over to meet her. See you later, Pete," said Dillon, tapping Peter on the shoulder before alighting onto Great Western Street. Tom Vincent, the guy with the missing head, had been working with Martinez one night while Tony Chino dined with his wife at Ramirez's restaurant, a popular place where most of the mob guys ate. Chino was treating his wife on their wedding anniversary. With Chino being a well-feared man in the business he was in, his wife somehow wore the pants. Half an hour into their main course, in walked Martinez and Vincent, sitting directly behind Chino. He was about to pay his respects to the pair until he overheard Vincent's conversation with Martinez. "So Montano's bitch was all over me. I'm thinking, what the fuck is going on here? So Montano goes to take another piss after we sit down from the dance floor, and guess what?" "What?" replied Martinez. "She pulls out my fucking cock right there and then and starts chewing on it under the table," said Vincent proudly. "What a fucking whore," said Martinez. "You're telling me the cheek of the bitch right under his fucking nose," Vincent laughed. "Jesus, how you kept a straight face after Montano finished his piss, I'll never know," grinned Martinez. "Let me tell you, it was difficult. When Montano got back, his wife put a wet kiss smack bang on his lips, fucking tongues and all," bragged Vincent. "Oh, Jesus." Martinez started to laugh hysterically, and Vincent joined in. Chino grabbed their coats from the concierge, ushered out his wife quietly as not to alert Martinez and Vincent, and headed out of the doors and into a waiting cab, heading straight for the Flamingo Club where Montano was. Dillon, meanwhile, rushed across the street, just missing a car that honked its horn at him. The driver got the middle finger treatment. He pulled the entrance door open to his apartment building and shouted from the bottom of the stairs, where Amy was approaching the first floor. She made her way back down to him. "Hi, Dillon, I've just finished work. I was on an early shift and just thought I'd pop by. Not seen you for a while. What you been up to?" said Amy enthusiastically. "Oh, you know, just hanging around the apartment and looking for jobs." "Well, you could have phoned me. You know I worry. Anyway, Mom and Dad called. They're in Saint-Tropez." "Oh, yeah?" said Dillon, interested. His parents had taken a year out to see the world. "Yeah, they've said everything's fine and they're heading off to Italy next." "Oh, and one more thing," said Amy with a look of worry on her face. "What's that?" said Dillon. "Try to keep calm," said Amy. "Oh, no. This doesn't sound good. Amy, what's happened?" said Dillon with concern. "Well, it's about your bike." "No, please don't say you backed into it again. The last time you did that, the new mudguard cost me an arm," Amy interrupted. "Dillon, it's a little worse than that. Yesterday, to stop me backing into it again, I pushed it into the driveway when the phone rang in the house, so I quickly ran inside to get it. I was looking through the lounge window whilst I was talking. Some guy just hopped onto it and took off. It happened so quickly I couldn't do nothing," said Amy nervously. "Oh, no. Amy, you know how long it took for me to save for that baby," cried Dillon. "I know, I'm sorry. I can make it up to you. You're insured, aren't you?" "Oh, Jesus. God damn it. Yes, I'm insured, but that's not the point. God damn it, Amy," said Dillon angrily. Just then the fire door on the ground floor opened. There stood Malty in all his glory. Great timing, Dillon thought. "Okay, before you start ranting and raving, I've got your money, so chill out. I'm not in the mood right now," said Dillon. "Well, what are you waiting for then? Hand it over. It's 3 months now, you know." said the fat landlord. Yeah, the check is, Amy interrupted. How much, Mr. Maltesa? Now, let's see. 3 months at $300 a month? Well, I make that an even $900. Amy pulled out her checkbook from her purse and, using her knee as a table, crouched down and wrote it for the full amount. Who do I make it out to, then? Said Amy. Bloodsuckers Incorporated, Dillon butted in. Malty gave a dismissive look and replied, Maltesa Properties, please, miss. Dillon cringed at the way he spoke to his sister. That simpering tone made him want to retch. Amy and Pete had won $4,000 on the previous week's lotto, so she was unusually flush for cash. Malty made a quick snatch for the check and was off like a rat down a hole. Call it a sorry for the bike, said Amy with a baby-faced look about her. Thank you, Amy. I don't know what I'd do without you, said Dillon as he tweaked Amy's nose. The insurance will cover the cost of the theft, won't it? Said Amy. Yeah, that's if it's not found first, said Dillon. I'm sorry, Dillon, said Amy once again. Anything can be expected, the way my luck's going at the moment. Listen, I've got to rush. I've got to pop over to see Peter. Call me, okay? Said Amy, flashing Dillon a serious look and mouthed the words, sorry, silently as she left the building. Dillon walked up the stairs to his apartment and called Salty. Salty answered. Hi, it's me, Dillon. Are you busy at the moment? Not right this minute. Why do you ask? Said Salty. Remember I told you I needed to have that chat with you? Yeah, I remember. I'll be over shortly. Salty hung up. Chapter 4. Dillon explained his idea to Salty, who wasn't very impressed. He managed to cool him down a bit, and then asked about his friend who had the guns. That friend of yours, the one who owns that store selling military souvenirs, said Dillon. You mean Paul Vietnam Owens? Replied Salty. That's the guy, said Dillon excitedly. What about him? Said Salty. Do you think he'll sell us some shooters? I'm not sure, replied Salty with uncertainty. Dillon picked up the phone and punched in Terry's number. It connected and Terry picked it up. Speak, said Terry. Hi, Terry. I'm on my way around with Salty. Give me 10 minutes, said Dillon. Okay, yeah. Where are we going? Said Terry, as Dillon watched Salty staring blankly out of the apartment window. We're taking a ride into town. I'll explain everything when I get to your house, so be ready, okay? Make it about half an hour, will you? I got my mother here, and it's going to take me a bit of time to get rid of her. Fine, said Dillon. He hung up. Dillon walked over to the sofa and sat down. Salty? Yeah, he replied. Salty turned from the window to face Dillon. Sit down. I need you to do something for me in case anything goes wrong. Salty hesitated. What, Dillon? Dillon passed Salty an envelope. If I'll make it through all this, I need you to give this to Amy. Will you do that for me, please? What is it, Dillon? Dillon closed Salty's hand around the envelope. Please, no more questions. Will you do it for me? That's all I ask. Dillon looked at Salty with a serious expression. I'll do it, but all this business is starting to freak me out, Dillon, replied a concerned Salty. Yeah, it's understandable. But anyway, let's hit the road, he replied nonchalantly. Dillon threw Salty's car keys to him. Salty fumbled but caught them. They both headed out through the front door, down the stairs, out of the exit of the building, and onto the street. They got in a cab which faced the exit. The engine started and they headed for Terry's. There wasn't much conversation on the way to Terry's house, but the look on Salty's face concerned Dillon. All Dillon's planning of the job gave him a feeling of paranoia with everyone he met. Even though Salty was a very close friend, Dillon was in deep thought over what Salty had said in the apartment. His reservations about what he intended to do made him unsure. Dillon wasn't sure whether or not he could trust Salty with the envelope. But who else could he trust? The cab made a screeching noise as Salty applied the brakes outside of Terry's house. Dillon was jolted out of thought back into reality. "Honk the horn, Salty." He did so. There was a still silence as they waited for Terry to appear. 5 minutes passed. Salty was tapping his fingers upon the steering wheel, looking irritable. It also made Dillon irritable. "How long do we have to wait for this clown? Does it really have to take this long?" seethed Salty. "Not long, chill out. I did say 30 minutes, said Dillon, relaxed and calm. Salty wasn't a big fan of Terry's, since last year when he had flooded his house, crashed his car, and almost blew up his kitchen whilst house-sitting. Salty was on holiday. Terry's accidental fiascos were never explained properly. Such disaster seemed impossible. But ever since, it's just been like a big joke to Terry. Salty didn't like Terry's particular brand of humor. Terry appeared and opened the door of the cab, jumped into the back seat, and closed the door. "All right, buddy," said Dillon, giving Terry a couple of friendly punches. Salty pulled away from the sidewalk and sped off. "Where we going then?" said Terry. "Down to Owen's army shop to try and pick up some stuff for the job." "Keep it low, we've got Mighty Mouth driving," Terry said to Dillon. "For your information, I already know all about it, asshole. Unless your comments about me, you're not exactly person of the year at the moment," Salty scorned. "Touchy, aren't we there, Salty boy?" said Terry, smiling at Dillon and massaging Salty's shoulders in Vulcan style, causing Salty to shake him off. Terry took out a cigarette and attempted to light it. "Not in the cab, Terry, you know the rules," said Salty. Terry lifted his cigarette pack so that Salty could see in his rearview mirror and put the cigarette slowly back into the pack with a sarcastic smile. Salty smiled back as they turned into Moss View Shopping Center car park. He found a vacant space very quickly, and all three of them alighted from the car. They headed through the underpass and into the walkway leading to Owens' shop. Vietnam Owens had served 6 years in Vietnam, from 1963 to 1969. He was in the 5th Battalion and commander of his 12-man field unit. One day, Owens and his platoon were on an assignment to seek and destroy some VC rat holes on the far side of a vast paddy field. He led his men through, anxiously worrying if they would make it home alive. The men were split into groups of 4 and spaced 30 feet apart in an arrow formation. A young guy walked at the side of Owens, sweating and breathing heavily. "Don't worry, we'll make it through," he told the young conscript. Up to their knees in mud, they trudged on. Owens himself felt a little edgy as to what may happen next. The fear of the unexpected was giving him a sick feeling in his stomach. The walk through the mud and sludge was becoming unbearable, giving the feeling of extra weight to his backpack. Owens took a look to his right and left flank, checking his men, who were all in their positions. The look on the faces of the men was one of bewilderment. The sound of their equipment seemed magnified. The fine rain soaked their skin. Too quiet, Owens thought to himself. Where the hell are these fuckers? They were surrounded, and it didn't end well. But he managed to get most of his soldiers out of the mess. One of the many stories that Owens had been through. They entered the old shop. A bell rang at the top of the door. This place was Military City. Combat jackets, tin helmets, radio equipment. Everything you needed to start your own private war. Owens stocked it. Terry was floating about the place like a kid in a candy store. After Salty had had a few words with Owens, he locked the front door, flipped over the "back in 5 minutes" sign, then led them through the back of the shop. By this time, Owens was preaching the old army stories of how many gooks he had wasted, the usual one-man army chat. While Owens carried on the stories, he opened a large trunk. He obviously wasn't joking about the amount of firepower at his disposal. There were all sorts of Kalashnikovs, Uzis, handguns, rifles, and even grenades. Dillon had a few words with Owens, who looked as though he was high on something, giddy as fuck, and he didn't even seem to be aware of what day it was. Dillon took advantage of his state of mind and asked if he could take a couple of Glocks and that he would reimburse him greatly later. "Of course, soldier," said Owens with a sharp salute. Handing the weapons, along with 2 clips for each, Dillon noticed out of the corner of his eye Terry slipping an M59 fragment grenade into his pocket. As they left the shop, Dillon pulled Terry to one side as Salty carried on a few paces. "Don't think you're bringing that on the job with you, you crazy bastard. I don't plan on shooting anyone, let alone sending them to the moon," gestured Dillon. "Bringing what?" said Terry, bemused. "Don't take me for a fucking clown. That grenade you lifted," pointing to Terry's pocket. Oh, that's just for show. A little scare factor," replied Terry. "No, I don't care. It's not coming. End of story," demanded Dillon. Terry mumbled to himself as Dillon shouted to Salty to wait up. They got back to the cab and set off back to Terry's house. Salty dropped them off. "Thanks, Andy," said Dillon. "Don't mention it. Literally. But at least think it over while you still have the chance before you fuck yourself up," said Salty with concern. "Hey, chill out. You're looking at a rich man here," said Dillon. Dillon turned from the cab and threw his arm around Terry's shoulder, dragging him a little in the process. Terry twisted out of Dillon's grip, looked at Salty, and mouthed the words "asshole," pointing at him and smiling. Salty stuck out his arm through the cab window and extended his middle finger before screeching off. Terry made a short dash to catch up with Dillon, chuckling to himself. "Hurry up," said Dillon, standing at the front door. "Ever heard of cleaning up?" "I'll get round to it. Anyway, what's the plan?" asked Terry. "Okay, I've got a couple of Halloween masks at the apartment." "What kind?" asked Terry. Dillon paused. "What the fuck difference does it make what type of masks they are? A ghost one and a hockey one," said Dillon, puzzled. "I'll take the ghost one," said Terry. "Okay, whatever. Just listen," said Dillon, raising his voice slightly. "We steal a couple of vehicles, stash them somewhere. Around 4:25, we pull up in one of them, while the other vehicle we leave near the old railway bridge. Yeah, that's where we'll leave it. It's a good enough spot and not too far from the bank. After we enter the bank, you spray the camera above the door. I'll force the guards to open the steel doors. You deal with the rest of the people in there. After I've done that, get everyone to the floor while I go into the vault for the 4 cases that we're after. I've got a couple of duffel bags. After the snatch, we come out of the bank and off. It's as simple as that," said Dillon with sincerity. "I like it," said Terry, looking through Dillon's CD collection, hardly listening. "So do I, my friend, so do I," said Dillon, caught up in the moment. "Oh, before I forget, go easy on the guard at the front. As you know, it's Amy's soon-to-be husband," said Dillon. "Okay, cool," replied Terry. Dillon and Terry both set off on foot to Dillon's apartment, which was a good walk, but it would give them enough time to discuss the job's finer details. On arrival at Dillon's apartment, they stored the guns, masks, and grenade in one of the duffel bags and set off to acquire the vehicles needed for the job. They found the first quickly, an old Ford minivan, and hid it straight away under the bridge as planned. Underneath the railway bridge was an arched opening which descended to a level about 10 feet below ground. At that present time, the arch was being used as a local rubbish dump. Terry cleared a path for the Lexus that had taken the rest of the day to find. The van was covered with tree branches and rubbish bags. The Lexus was positioned next to it and covered in the same manner as the minivan. With both vehicles now covered, they were invisible to passers-by. Standing at the opening of the arch, Dillon and Terry brushed off the dust that had covered their clothing. They chilled out for the rest of the day, thinking of what luxuries that money would bring. "So, Next week it is then, said Terry. Dillon nodded a yes. One question. When it's done, where are we gonna go? We can't stay here anymore, said Terry. Already thought about that one, Terry, and we're gonna go to Mexico. I think we can make a good life for ourselves there. Terry smiled. Chapter 5. 1 week later. Dillon woke around 1:30 p.m. after another heavy night, jumped out of bed, dashed to the sofa, waking up Terry, who was sleeping like a baby. Come on, we gotta clean ourselves up, get ready, said Dillon. The time was 3:20 when they finally got ready, after going over the plan a dozen times. Everything was in order. The bag with the hardware was packed minus the grenade, which Dillon intended to dispose of somewhere along the way to the van. It had slipped his mind that he had left it on the coffee table. However, it hadn't slipped Terry's. They left the apartment at 3:45 p.m. They made the short journey to the railway bridge where both vehicles lay untouched. Brushing the debris off the van, they set off toward the bank, circling the vicinity and checking their getaway route. All set, said Dillon. I think so, said Terry. They turned the corner onto Great Western. What time is it? Said Dillon. 4:20, replied Terry. Terry noticed that Dillon looked a little unnerved, which in turn made himself a little uneasy. Fucking van, yelled Dillon, breathing irregular and ramming the gear stick into third. Calm down, for God's sake. Dillon ignored Terry's comment. His mind was fixated on the job ahead. Check the shit in the bags, said Dillon impassively. I already have, you just concentrate on the road, replied Terry. Terry then patted his jacket lovingly and was reassured to the solid feel of the grenade that lay there. You remember everything you gotta do, Terry? Yeah, we've been through it enough times I should know by now. Just making sure, said Dillon. Dillon slowed down. The bank was now in sight. He edged the van over to the sidewalk just as the security van drove past. The time was now 4:27. Like clockwork, Dillon thought. Terry and Dillon pulled in about 20 feet behind the truck. The guards entered the bank. Dillon felt a drizzle of perspiration run down the nape of his neck. Right, as soon as we get in, I'll go straight for the guards. You get the cameras, the doors, and deal with the hostages, okay? Oh, and no mentioning our names when we're in there. Keep our talking to a minimum. If our planning is precise, there's no need for communication between us. Okay, let's do it, said Dillon sternly. They stepped from the van, tooled up, pulling the masks over their faces. They made a dash for the oak doors. Once inside, Terry bolted the doors shut. Dillon rushed the guards. Everybody hit the fucking floor now, screamed Terry. Screams from the hostages echoed off the bank walls. Terry sprayed the cameras. There were 4 people in the service area being attended to by the bank tellers. The other 2 positions were closed. Everyone dropped to the floor quickly, including the guards. Terry ran about the place like a headless chicken, trying to sort everyone out. Dillon got the guards back on their feet. The manager hit the floor next to the steel door. You get the fuck up and open this door, screamed Dillon at the manager. Do it now, or your brains will cover the door, screamed Dillon, raising the barrel of the Glock he was holding to the guard's temple. A man from behind the door buzzed them in. Dillon pushed the 2 guards to the vault door, motioned to the bank manager to open the vault. How should I know how to open it? I'm not a fucking manager. He's over there. Fucking amateurs, said the man, pointing over to the manager under a desk. Who the fuck are you then? Said Dillon, his heartbeat now hammering. You'll find out soon who I am. That's if you're not already frying in the state pen. Dillon ignored him. The vault door was now open and one of the guards produced the cases. Pull out the other 3 and disarm the dye sprayer. Any funny business and I put one in your buddy's head, said Dillon, with the Glock still positioned at the other guard's temple. Slowly now. said Dillon. The guard disarmed the cases. Dillon commanded to have one opened. Turning from red to green, the case popped open. Dillon's eyes lit up to the contents, which was full of $50 bills. There must be about $500,000 in there. Easy. So 4 makes $2 million. Jesus, thought Dillon. He closed the case, and together with the other 3, he slid them along the bank's marble floor toward Terry, telling him to fill up the duffel bags. Terry was beside the security door holding the hostages, who had a look of total fear on their faces, all huddled together beside the first bank teller's window. Terry held all 4 hostage. He finished loading up the bags. "Hurry up, Dillon," said Terry nervously. "I said no names," Dillon angrily shouted back. Terry was holding his weapon toward the 4 hostages and was shaking slightly with panic. The women whimpered with fear. Perspiration trickled down Terry's face behind the mask. His breathing was irregular, and it was becoming unbearable to wear. He didn't like the way the hostages stared at him, so he demanded they lie face down. They did so without hesitation. "Hands behind your heads," cried Terry. He noticed that one of the men had only one hand up to his head. Terry walked over. "I said both hands! Are you deaf?" screamed Terry, pointing the barrel of his gun at the man's head. The man turned his face to Terry and explained to him that he only had one arm. "Okay, well, keep that one behind your head then," said Terry. He glanced over to Dillon. The guy that Dillon thought was the manager spoke once more. "You better spend it quick. You ain't gonna live long." "Shut the fuck up. Now hit the floor, count to 1,000. When you get to 1,000, you start again," said Dillon. "Fuck you. We'll meet again soon," said the man. Backing up from the security door, Dillon noticed Peter and looked away quickly. Dillon now headed back toward the oak doors. Terry still had the barrel of his gun trained on the hostages. A sense of relief filled Dillon, knowing no one had come to no harm. The sound of police sirens could be heard in the distance. They were approaching fast. Dillon and Terry got to the doors just as a steel shutter rolled down in front of them. Terry's panic-stricken mode was now in full swing. He waved his gun aimlessly at anyone and everyone. Dillon turned to Terry. "Chill the fuck out. All we need now is you to flip out, and we're in deep shit." "Yeah, well, what do we do now?" shouted Terry, expelling spittle out of the mouth of the mask. "I'm thinking, so cool it," said Dillon. Dillon ordered the hostages to the vault. "Keep your hands up," shouted Dillon, just as Peter was lowering his hands. Dillon tried to mask his voice in hope that Peter wouldn't recognize it. In through the security doors once more, the hostages were put into the vault. Dillon prodded them in, along with the vanguards, the manager, Peter, and the guy he had previously mistaken for the manager. He would soon find out who the mystery man was. Dillon paced up and down the teller's windows, then called the manager and Peter back out of the vault and told them to hit the floor once more. Dillon wasn't thinking straight. He didn't know why he'd brought them back out. There was a deadly silence inside the bank now, except for Terry's wandering around and muttering to himself. "This is just great," said Terry, taking off his mask. He produced a Marlboro Light from the crushed box in his top pocket. Tearing off a match from the book of matches from his other pocket, he lit up the cigarette. The match flared as it ignited. Dillon made his way over to where Terry was sitting. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" fumed Dillon. "Having a smoke. What the fuck does it look like?" replied Terry in a carefree tone. "Put that fucking mask back on, you idiot! What are you trying to do, get us both pinched?" said Dillon angrily, as he walked from him to the window of the bank. Twitching the blinds, the police were seconds away. Already a crowd began to gather outside. Terry pulled the mask back over his face and carried on to smoke through the mouthpiece. "You better think of something fast, Dillon, or I'm gonna..." Terry coughed between his sentence and ground out the cigarette on the polished marble floor viciously. The cigarette seemed impossible to smoke through the mask. Dillon gathered up the money bags and threw them on the table at the back of the bank. Various deposit and withdrawal slips fluttered to the ground in doing so. Suddenly, a loud voice sounded outside of the bank. "Okay, I'm going to call you on the bank's internal phone. Answer it and tell me how we're going to solve this, and I'll see what we can do. I'll be the one speaking to you. My name is Sergeant Alan Robson." The sergeant stood at the side of one of the patrol cars outside the bank. Terry stood up abruptly and shouted, "There'll be no negotiating for me, thank you." Dillon stood, deep in thought, before shouting over to Terry. Terry arrived at Dillon's side. "Right, this is how we're going to play it," said Dillon. "No more of your stupid plans. They're not working. They're jinxed," screamed a now hysterical Terry. "Hey now, get a grip. Listen to yourself," replied Dillon, grabbing Terry's arm. "Dillon, I can't take going to jail. No way, it's not for me." Dillon sat down, hands against his head. The cold steel of his Glock soothed the side of his throbbing skull. He was unhappy with Terry's actions. The sound of more vehicles on the outside screeched to a halt. The sound of car doors slammed, and the deadly sound of weapons being cocked and armed could be heard clearly by all in the silence of the bank. This heightened the tension even more. Dillon looked toward the manager. "Open the shutter," said Dillon calmly, but nervously. "It can't be done. Once the silent alarm is activated and the shutter rolls down, you need an engineer to manually override it," said the manager. "Bullshit!" shouted Terry, blasting a round of bullets over the manager's head. "Jesus, what are you doing?" shouted Dillon, jumping with shock to Terry's crazed actions. There were 2 black and whites and an unmarked squad car outside. The bank's phone, which had been constantly ringing, stopped, and the loud voice over a bullhorn crackled into life once more. "There's no way out of there. The bank is surrounded, so put down your weapons and walk out calmly with your hands in the air," said the sergeant. Terry knew to himself that he was gonna do nothing of the sort. He walked over to the steel shutter. "Manually override this, you motherfuckers," said Terry with pure anger in his voice. There was no reply to Terry's demand. He pulled out the grenade he had brought with him, taken from Dillon's table. He quickly pulled out the pin and jammed it in the side of the shutter. It was too late for Dillon to lecture him at this point. After a few seconds, there was an almighty explosion. Rubble flew everywhere. Dillon and Terry had just managed to throw themselves beneath a sturdy-looking table. The sound of the explosion and the amount of flying glass was overwhelming. Light fittings crashed to the ground. Loud thuds could be heard as chunks of masonry fell onto the table they were under. It lasted for about 8 seconds, but seemed much longer. As the sound diminished, the last pieces of glass fell from their wooden frames to the ground. Everything became quiet once more as Dillon and Terry crawled from under the table and brushed the dust from their clothes. Grabbing the green duffel bags, which had now turned gray with dust, they made their way to the front doors of the bank. The surroundings of the bank were devastated. It no longer looked like a bank, but a demolition site. Dillon looked toward Peter and noticed, along with the 2 guards and the man, they lay motionless, covered in debris. A cloud of dust poured from the vault door. The hostages inside were silent. The explosion had caused the whole bank structure to vibrate. The crunching of glass underfoot echoed in the silence, and thick, acrid smoke filled the bank. The sound of people moaning from their injuries was eerie. Not only had the grenade taken out the steel shutter, but also the doors, half the bank wall, and the squad cars. The twisted bodies of police were strewn across the width of Great Western Street. Dillon looked to Terry in complete shock, facing the carnage in front of them. They ran to the van, jumped in, and sped off to the other getaway vehicle at the railway bridge. They arrived, torched the van. Terry puked nervously before making their getaway in the Lexus. They set off in the direction of the freeway. Chapter 6. What the fuck was all that about, Rambo? You've probably killed about a dozen people. I said no shooting, so you blow up half the street? I also told you to leave the grenade, shouted Dillon, smashing his hands down onto the steering wheel in anger. Well, I didn't see you coming up with any great ideas on how to get us out of there, and if I didn't bring the grenade, it would have been us dead, not the cops, said Terry in his defense. Dillon didn't comment. We're gonna have to get rid of this car soon, get to a hotel and rethink this situation, said Dillon. After driving up the freeway a good 10 miles or so, they turned off at a junction with a sign above reading, "Quality cars at low prices. Big Al's guaranteed quality." In a run-down area which was out of view to passers-by, they torched the Lexus in a back street and continued on foot, stashing the bags behind a dumpster close by. Dillon grabbed a wad of notes from one of the bags and headed over to Big Al's, where they purchased a 2-liter Ford Escort. Nothing flash, but good enough to get them away, as far from West Point as possible. They drove for at least 2 hours north, towards California, their faces expressionless, eventually pulling into a Holiday Inn. "Good afternoon, how can I help?" said the hotel clerk sitting behind reception. "We would like a room, please," said Dillon. "Would that be standard, double, or deluxe?" "Standard, please," replied Dillon. Terry nudged Dillon, as he wanted for a deluxe. Dillon indicated a no-go to Terry with a double-pressure nudge back. The lounge of the hotel was plush with fine carpets from the front doors right into the elevators. The restaurant area was filled with a smart-looking crowd, women with an over-the-top amount of jewelry, complete with leather skin suntans. Men engrossed in their daily papers. The thick cigar smoke swirled around their heads. You could smell money all around you. Bellboys walking to and fro, dressed from head to toe in red and gold uniforms with gold buttons, constantly assisting clients with their luggage. "There you go, sir. Room 321. I'll have an assistant to help you with your bags." "No. It'll be fine. We'll manage. Thank you," replied Dillon. Dillon and Terry picked up the bags and headed toward the elevator. Dillon pushed the button to call it and waited for it to descend. "We stay here for one night, and then we move on," said Dillon as the bell indicated the elevator's arrival. They stepped in. "Then what?" said Terry, pushing the button for the 3rd floor. The door closed after them. "One step at a time, Terry. Let's see how much we got in the bags first," said Dillon. They stepped out into the corridor and walked down the 3rd floor to room 321. Dillon put the key in the door and they both entered, putting the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the outer door handle. The bags were tossed onto the bed. "Do you know who that guy was in the bank with the guards?" shouted Terry with frustration from the bathroom as he inspected the quality. "Who?" replied Dillon, unzipping one of the bags. "Jesus," said Terry, returning back to the room, next to the bed where Dillon stood, staring in awe at the contents of the bags. "Yeah, and there's 3 more like it," said Dillon quietly, now smiling. "Who did you say the guy was?" said Dillon. "That guy you thought was the manager is Tony Chino," said Terry seriously. "Am I supposed to know him?" said Dillon. "You should. It's Don Montano's right-hand man," replied Terry. "Don Montano? The wise guy?" said Dillon, flicking through the $50 bills. "Yeah," said Terry with a serious expression. "I hope that this isn't their money. If it is, we're in a lot more shit than I first thought." Dillon unzipped the 4th and final bag, which didn't contain any money, just documents of some kind. "What are these?" said Dillon, waving them to Terry, who was pouring himself a drink from the minibar. The first thing Dillon noticed was the heading on the top of the paperwork, Montano Real Estate Tax Report. It was Don Pablo's, 10 years worth, and the mob boss was going to have big problems if this paperwork wasn't returned. The best way for a prison term for gangsters these days was tax evasion, and without this paperwork, there was no proof of his laundering, therefore prison time. This was looking bad. Chapter 7. Don Montano was sitting beside the pool of his luxurious mansion house, sipping a large bourbon on the rocks. He looked very much at home, the master of his kingdom. He was being attended to by Martin, a young faggot who looked after the pool and the gardens for him. Montano's choice of housekeeper, a homosexual, was a choice for his own peace of mind, just in case his wife was to get a little frisky again. She would find it hard to ring Martin's bell. His cell phone rang. He answered it and noticed Chino approaching from the patio. Tony looked a little preoccupied. Okay, no problem. The Don terminated the call and turned his attention to Tony. ¿Qué pasa? Said the Don. Bad news, boss. Our Thursday drop has been ripped off, said Chino uncomfortably. What the fuck are you talking about, ripped off? Said Don Montano. Two little pricks, complete amateurs. But don't worry, boss, it won't take me long to find them, reassured Chino. Which security truck was it? Montano interrupted. I don't know, boss, said a worried Chino. The Don snatched up his phone and punched in a few numbers. Montano here, put me through to Mike. He barked down the phone. Mike, is that you? Said Montano. Yes, sir, I'm here, replied Mike. What was the number on the security van delivering today? Said the Don. Can you hold 1 second, please, Don Montano? I'll check the screen. There was a pause for a few seconds before Mike got back. Okay, serial number 8320, said Mike. Okay, thanks, Mike. Montano gathered his thoughts for a moment before instructing Chino. Okay, Tony, I need these fucking cockroaches found and found soon. There's a lot of important files these cunts have of mine and I need it sorted quick, said Montano menacingly. Montano stood up, dived into the pool and swam a few lengths. He pulled himself out and walked to the patio, where Martin helped him on with his robe. Telling Martin to get the butler, his eyes wandered toward his wife, who was approaching the pool in a swimsuit cut low, revealing her slender back. The butler arrived and Montano whispered into his ear, not taking his eyes off Paige, his beautiful wife. Montano ordered himself a sandwich and some fresh orange juice. He had met Paige Parker in the Blue Flamingo Club whilst he was doing a charity night in aid of homeless kids, when Paige caught his eye. She was on the dance floor with some Italian-looking guy. Montano watched as she entered the men's room with the guy. He decided to find out what was going on. Pushing the men's room open, he heard the two voices coming from one of the cubicles. Hey, lay off me, will ya? Montano aimed a swift kick to the cubicle door. The Italian was standing behind Paige, handling her with a sexual grip, while she was helping herself to the neat lines of cocaine that were set up on the toilet cistern. At that point, Chino also walked in. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Said the Italian. Without answering, Montano dragged the Italian by his hair and flung him toward Chino. Get this piece of shit out the back doors and let no one see the commotion. Okay, boss, replied Chino as he manhandled the guy through the toilet door. And you, young lady, are coming with me, said Montano in a matter-of-fact tone. I'm going nowhere with you, said Paige. What she really meant was that she did want to go with him. She did, of course, know exactly who he was, and she was the type who had a taste for money and the high rollers. You come with me, or we take some of this here snow and go have a word with Mr. Cop, okay? Ordered Montano. He pulled her by the arm and led her out of the toilet and into the dimly lit dining area of the club. Let go of me! Montano released his grip on Paige. Listen, why don't you have dinner with me before you leave? And if I don't? She replied. If you don't, then you don't, said Montano as he turned and walked towards the VIP area of the club, which was situated in a prime position by a small stage. Paige was standing a few feet from the table, wondering what to do. He held his hands in a gesture to say, "Well, are you coming over or not?" Paige decided to go over. Montano smiled to himself and sang along to the artiste who was doing a Frank Sinatra number. Paige sat down. Montano clicked his fingers to a nearby waiter, who acknowledged his presence with a nod of his head. The waiter disappeared and returned moments later with a bottle of Montano's favorite wine. The waiter poured into glasses. "What brings you to the Flamingo, then?" said Montano. "It's my birthday today, and I was having quite a nice time until you interrupted and roughed up my date," said Paige, not making eye contact with him. "Your date? You gotta be kidding me. That shit you were powdering your nose with will do you no good, and by the looks of things, he was doing a good job of messing you up," replied Montano. "Yeah, well, I'm a big girl, and what's it to you anyway?" said Paige, her eyes still directed elsewhere. "So, what are we eating then?" said Montano, smiling. Paige looked at him and smiled back sarcastically. After a few drinks and an hour's worth of idle chit-chat, Montano's charms had paid off, and so it was back to his private quarters in the back of the club. From then on, their relationship bonded, and a year later, they were married. Chapter 8. $750,000, cried Dillon. Repeating the figure over and over, both Dillon and Terry laughed uncontrollably. "We're gonna have to get these tax documents back to that gangster guy somehow," said Dillon. "Are you crazy? Why don't we just hand him our heads on a plate while we're at it?" said Terry. "Maybe we could drop the paperwork outside his house, and maybe he'll forget about the money," said Dillon. "I can tell you something now, Dillon. They're gonna find us before we even attempt to deliver these papers, so we better get the fuck out of here first thing in the morning," said Terry nervously. "Relax. We're gonna make a phone call to Montano first thing in the morning, crack a deal with him. He gets the papers, we get the cash. They're insured, they'll get the money back, then everyone's happy," said Dillon positively. "I don't like the idea, but I don't get much of a choice nowadays," said Terry, stubbornly throwing a bunch of $50 bills onto the bed. "We got him by the balls. Without these papers, him and his cronies will end up behind bars. Do you think he wants to risk that?" said Dillon reassuringly. Terry acknowledged, half-hearted, with a nod of his head. "I just hope it works out. Things haven't been going very well. And don't forget, these mob guys take things to heart. It's not about money to them. It's a matter of disrespect and shit," replied Terry. "We can only try, Terry. We got nothing to lose." "Like you say, they're going to be looking for us now anyway," said Dillon. Dillon and Terry made their way down to the restaurant hall of the hotel. Sitting at the nearest unoccupied table they could find, they picked up the menus. The waiter arrived. They both placed their order of steaks and champagne. The money was unmarked, so spending wasn't a problem. They sat eating and drinking the rest of the night, chatting about the old times. Reminiscing was all they could do now to take their minds off the present problem. They had to keep moving, putting as much distance between themselves and West Point. New lives would have to replace their old ones, but at least they had the money to do it. "I'll make the call to Montano in the morning," said Dillon. "Okay," said Terry reluctantly. Dillon woke to the hotel door knocking. His heart thumped irregularly thanks to last night's intake of alcohol. His night's sleep was broken a few times to vivid nightmares of strange situations between him and the mob. The hotel room door opened. The maid with clean bedding rolled in 2 trays of breakfast, also placing the sheets onto the chair beside the door. Dillon confronted her before she set out on her duties cleaning up. The cash was on show in the bedroom, so it was imperative to get her out as soon as possible. Dillon told her to call back later. She seemed fine with that, and left. Terry was already in the shower. Taking a sip from the glass of fresh orange juice, Dillon turned on the TV to the sound of police sirens. A rerun of Hawaii Five-0 was playing. "Good morning," said Terry as he came from the shower, rubbing his hair with a hotel towel. "Is it? I feel like shit," replied Dillon as he rubbed his head. "Lightweight drinker, that's your problem," said Terry, now tucking into a bagel. "What's the time?" said Dillon, rubbing his temples. 10:30 a.m. Time for you to make that call, ordered Terry. "Let's do it." Dillon turned down the TV just as Dano from Hawaii Five-0 was at the point of arrest. Pulling the phone onto his lap, he punched in the number that was on the top of the tax report. Holding the receiver gently to his ear, he stared at the papers hypnotically. "Montano Real Estate," came the reply at the other end of the line, the voice of a pleasant-sounding lady. "Could you put me through to Mr. Montano, please?" "Hold, please." Terry stared blankly at Dillon. "Don Pablo Montano speaking. How can I help?" "I think we have what you want, and this is the deal," said Dillon with authority. "Is this the dead guy with my money?" replied Montano casually. "Are you going to listen, or do I have to torch them right here?" replied Dillon. "Go ahead. Talk. I'm listening," said Montano. "Okay. I'll deliver these papers to you, and here's the deal. We keep the dough. You and I know that these papers are important to you. The other papers with the dead presidents are not so important. Pocket change to you, and easily replaced. We make the drop, you forget about us, we forget about you, and life goes on. Your answer, please, and make it quick. My fingers are itching to flick this Zippo." Dillon waited a few seconds before Montano gave a reply. "It's a tall order you're asking, but I'll go along with it," replied Montano begrudgingly. Dillon smiled at Terry. He gave a half smile back. "This is what you do. Tomorrow at 12 noon, you go to this address," said Montano. Dillon picked up a pen from the side of the phone and scribbled down the address on a Holiday Inn drinks serviette. 175 Ventura Boulevard. "When you get there, there'll be a guy with a dark," Dillon interrupted. "I'm not meeting any of your help. I'll drop it outside this address and I'm gone. 12 noon, okay?" rasped Dillon. He hung up the phone. Chapter 9. Sergeant Carl Ryan and Lieutenant Sid Simmons were investigating the case, dragging door to door on Great Western. They talked to Maltesa as a large crowd began assembling on the street around the devastated bank. Paramedics and firefighters were already dealing with the mess. "So you haven't seen this Dillon Thomas kid for a few days now, is that right?" said Simmons. "That's right. He paid his rent check and I've not seen him since," said Malty. "Okay, we'll be in touch if we need to speak with you again," said Ryan. "Anything to help, Sergeant," replied Malty. There were sounds of more paramedic sirens approaching in the distance outside of the bank. Uniformed officers began taping off the scene. The victims were coughing and spluttering whilst being aided by paramedics. Press coverage was in full flow, with a reporter for ZBC News explaining each and every detail. The two cops had done the routine work on Great Western, just as Ryan's radio blurted out a call for any available officers to check out an abandoned vehicle at the old railway bridge, with a possible connection with the bank heist. "Copy that, Blue 32 and 33 responding to the call, over," said Simmons. The two cops paid their thanks to the tenants of West Point buildings and made their way down the stairs and out into the black 98 Crown Victoria police sedan. With the siren on, they made the short 2-minute journey, cruising through each red light they approached. On arrival, 2 firefighters had just finished extinguishing a Ford minivan. After a brief talk with the fire chief, the radio in the sedan crackled into life again with a report of another abandoned vehicle. Once again, the two cops headed up onto the freeway to Route 54, en route to Big Al's Motors, close to where the remains of a Lexus lay. Miss Lyons stood outside her apartment door, looking as bemused as the other tenants. Maltesa made an adjustment to his matted hair and shuffled over to Miss Lyons. "What did you say to the cops about Dillon, Malty?" said Miss Lyons. "Nothing special, only what I know," he replied. "Well, making up your usual fairy tales won't be very good timing right now," she said. "Miss Lyons, none of this concerns me. What you and your boyfriend get up to in your spare time. Say, why don't you give me one of your special massages that you're advertising?" replied Malty with a filthy smile as he followed her into the apartment block. "Why don't you take yourself back down to that hole that you came from, turn your shower on cold, and get in," said Miss Lyons, angrily slamming her apartment door into his face. "I'm willing to pay," said Malty, raising his voice slightly, hoping Miss Lyons could hear from behind the door. He huffed and walked off with a shuffle down the corridor to the stairs. "Let me tell you, son, this piece of machinery, for its age, is higher than prime condition. Why, you could pick up your girl in this baby, and she'd be tearing at your seats in a jealous rage." Big Al engaged into full sales mode with his bright yellow suit and white cowboy hat and crocodile boots, leaving the college kid no room for questions about the car's condition, before being interrupted by Simmons and Ryan. "Excuse me, sir," said Ryan, thrusting his badge to Big Al. He pulled out the Cuban cigar that had been positioned in the side of his mouth, with a pissed-off look about him. He turned back to the kid. "Say, kid, why don't you sit yourself down inside that baby and get a feel of quality?" said Al. Big Al walked toward the office. The two cops followed. "This better be good. This is the first big potential sale all day, and as usual, your boys are close to fucking it up for me," raged Al. "We're sorry to bother you, Al. May I call you Al?" said Simmons. You can call me Cyril for all I fucking care. We'll make it quick. I got a family to feed," sighed Al. "Okay. The recent torching of the Lexus down the road. Did you see anything out of character after that happened?" asked Simmons. "Nope. Just one hell of a bang and a thick cloud of smoke," sniggered Al. "Anything out of the ordinary today at all?" said Ryan. "Let me see. Nothing special. Wait a minute. After the big bang, say 5 minutes later, I got a quick sale on a blue Escort. No sales pitch, just 2 guys paid cash for a cheap runner," said Al. "Could we take a look at the purchase books?" asked Ryan. "For God's sake, yeah. Just a second." Big Al shouted over to the kid, who was sat comfortably behind the wheel. "And I'll give you 10% off your next purchase if you hold on for a second." The kid waved at Al, seemingly still interested. Al smiled, then put back in his Cuban. "Anyway, follow me, guys, and let's get this cleared up as fast as we can." Al opened up the purchase book. "There you go. Cash sale for an 87 blue Ford Escort," said Al, pointing his stubby forefinger at the sales book. "You got no name with that?" asked Simmons. "Like I said, it was a quick cash sale. I don't take names unless it's credit," slurred Al, cigar in mouth. "You get a description of the guy?" said Ryan. "I'm sorry, no, officers. I tend to forget a face after a sale. Now, if you don't mind, I got a little business to attend to." Big Al walked off toward the kid. Simmons and Ryan had a suspect in mind, despite Big Al's lack of information. Both cops decided that checking up on a certain Dillon Thomas was in order. Simmons flicked the switch on the dashboard just above where the police-issue pump-action shotgun was situated, setting off the siren. Ryan turned the ignition of the black sedan, which started with a grunt. The sedan was the one Ryan selected personally from the motor pool, being of old-fashioned nature himself. That's the car he trusted, rather than the newer models. "God damn it!" cried Big Al. On returning to the car, the college kid had tired of waiting and had taken off. "Asshole cops!" Big Al slammed his fist onto an SUV's trunk. He grunted to himself as the taillight popped out and smashed to the ground. Simmons and Ryan arrived at HQ. A little later in the day, making their way to the chief's office to update the reports, Ryan sat at his cluttered police desk, adjusting the picture of his wife and son. He sifted clumsily through his police notes, found a clean sheet of paper and pen. Picking up the phone, he dialed the number to Miss Amy Thomas, which Miss Lyons had begrudgingly given to him at the questioning on Great Western. Chapter 10. Okay, this is what's gonna happen. You're gonna drop off this case. I'll be right across the street in the car with half of the paperwork for insurance. Gives us a little security in case anything happens to you, okay? You getting all of this? Said Dillon, nervously pacing the hotel room. So I'm the delivery guy. You've made that decision for me, I take it. Is that right? Replied a sarcastic Terry. We haven't got time for this bullshit, Terry. Now are you with me? We cannot have a fucking debate on this one, said Dillon impatiently. Okay, big guy, you're the boss. Leave me with the risks, said Terry passively. That's the spirit. Now let's make a move, said Dillon, anxiously checking his watch. He zipped up his overcoat and tossed one of the large duffel bags to Terry. Half of the other paperwork lay in one of the other 3 bags. They made their way to the reception desk, paid for their stay before setting off in the Ford on a 30-minute journey to Ventura Boulevard, number 175, Montano's beach house address he had given him. Terry headed up a small flight of stairs to the front door, which was glass-paneled. He cautiously approached, placing the bag onto the top of the stairs. He turned to leave, but felt the nozzle of cold steel being placed onto the nape of his neck. Slowly, get on your fucking knees and crawl in this door, growled Tony Chino, kicking open the door that was ajar. A cold chill ran through Terry's spine. He looked over to Dillon as he gently lowered his body to Chino's commands. Dillon was totally unaware as to what was now unfolding, as for a brief second, he'd taken his eyes from the beach house and looked toward the golden sands, with bikini-clad women prancing gingerly up and down Ventura beachfront. His attention was captured after hearing the glass paneling on the front side of the house rattle shut. Glancing from left to right, looking for Terry, there was no sign. With the arrival of a dark Cherokee van, Dillon couldn't hang around. Things had gone wrong. It was now time to work out what to do next. He would have to risk his own life exchanging the paperwork for Terry. He stepped on the gas and sped off from Ventura Boulevard in search of a place to think, and to make the call to Montano. The dark Cherokee was a rental model on loan to the FBI. They had surveillance on Montano 24/7, looking for Vincent. They had found Vincent's Dodge Viper left beside Lake Tahoe. It had 2 kilos of coke in the trunk with Vincent's prints all over it. An easy wrapped-up case for the feds. But they seemed to be having trouble finding him after he jumped bail. One day earlier, in the dank and dimly lit interrogation room of the Fed's HQ in Reno, Martinez was looking at a 7 stretch for handling Class A narcotics. And after intense questioning, the 2 dirty feds gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. A recent gangland slang had all the trademarks of a Montano hit. They couldn't point the finger at Vincent. He had an alibi. But to save his own ass, he was willing to be a witness, accusing Montano of slaying an ex-mafia member. Inside the rented apartment of 175 Ventura Boulevard, Montano stood with his back against a large patio window, with which its vertical Venetian blinds had been drawn shut, leaving only little lighting of the dining room, which was empty apart from a wooden rocking chair positioned central of the room. Terry was taped to it, his arms and legs strapped in thick silver insulation tape. "Where's the rest?" spoke Montano softly. "Like I said before, all I know is that this guy gives me $500 to bring that bag to this address," replied Terry unconvincingly. Montano nodded to Tony Chino, who was at the side of Terry. Chino placed a piece of tape across Terry's mouth, then swung a thick shafted wooden mallet down onto his thumb. Tears shot down his face as the extreme pain seared through the whole of his body. A muffled scream expelled from his mouth. His eyes slightly rolled back and forth after the blow. Now remember, you have another 9 digits on your hands. Then we start on your toes. Now shall we start from the beginning? Said Montano in a calm but bitter voice. Terry's fear-filled eyes glanced at Chino, who was smiling sadistically and holding the hammer in a position ready to strike again. Chino's face was stone-like, without mercy. Terry knew that he'd have to tell them something, and something like the truth would probably only suffice. Terry turned back toward Montano and nodded a yes. Chino was hoping that he would have stuck to his first story, and was disappointed when Montano told him to put down the hammer and remove the tape from Terry's mouth. Chino did so, and ripping the tape very quickly. My friend, he has the rest of your money. Oh God, please don't hurt me no more, cried Terry. And he is where? Said Montano, approaching Terry. I don't know now, but he was outside this apartment waiting for me to take a look. Maybe he's still there, said a petrified Terry. Montano returned back to the patio window and peered through the gap between the blinds. A blue escort. Jesus, please give me something to wrap up my fucking thumb. I feel faint and I'm losing blood, said Terry in total shock and full of terror. There's no blue escort outside here. So before we start the pain once more, I want your friend, and I want him soon, growled Montano. He knows you have me, and we made arrangements for anything happening like this. He'll call. He knows your cell phone number. Please just give him time, said Terry, wincing with pain. Tell me what makes you think that he's gonna call to save your ass. For all you know, he could be on his way out of the country as we speak, said Montano. He won't. I've known him since we were kids. He won't do that to me, said Terry in a fit of desperation. Okay. For every hour that so-called friend of yours doesn't call, we'll take one of these. Montano lifted Terry's index finger. Well manicured, said Montano, tilting his head and raising his eyebrows with sincerity. Chino stood still beside him, awaiting Montano's instructions. It was now 1:45. They had waited 45 minutes since the first of Terry's digits was squashed. His thumb now roughly bandaged with fresh medical cotton, which Montano had brought from a first aid kit that was in the limo outside. Time seemed to drag minutes like hours as Terry waited nervously, now taped at the mouth again. The time reached 1:58. Montano puffed on a fine Cuban cigar. He was now sitting on a parcel box that he'd brought from another room. Silence enveloped the three of them. The room smelled musty and unused. Terry was becoming excruciatingly uncomfortable. The throbbing pain had subsided a little, but the fear of his death grew. Montano's phone rang at 1:59. He answered, "Hello?" "You have my friend. That wasn't the deal," said Dillon. He was calling from a quiet donut store further up on Ventura Beach. "I don't know who the fuck you are, or who you think you are, but your friend here is suffering for your fuck-ups, so I want the rest of my papers," yelled Montano. "Okay, I'll bring them. Now listen," Montano interrupted. "No, now you listen. The address is 215 Castle Heights, Oceanside. You be there in 2 hours," said Montano incredulously. "Let me speak with Terry," said Dillon. The line went dead. Dillon slammed down the handset. The employee behind the counter of the donut store was cleaning up coffee cups. He looked at Dillon impassively. Dillon leaned against the payphone, head in hands, and exhaled. After Amy received the call from Sergeant Ryan, she made her way to Burbank Police HQ, where she was led into an interview room and questioned by Ryan and Simmons. "So you haven't seen him since last week," said Ryan. "That's right. Now look, I'm a busy woman. I've been here for an hour and a half now. Could you please tell me what's happened to Dillon?" said Amy, supremely optimistic.
"All the residents of West Point buildings have been interviewed as to the robbery on Great Western Bank. All, that is, except your brother," replied Simmons.
"Your boyfriend works over at the bank, is that right?" said Ryan. "That's right. And at the moment he's being treated for minor injuries and shock. Before you ask, I know he's nothing to do with this," replied Amy assuringly. After the two cops finished questioning down at the crime scene, they hadn't much info to move on. The only logical suspect had to be Dillon Thomas. The residents in West Point had all checked out. As the two cops had trouble finding Dillon's whereabouts, Miss Amy Thomas had been brought in for questioning. Ryan and Simmons stood, arms folded, in the enclosed interrogation room. Amy sat at the large cedar wood table with an ashtray in the center overflowing with cigarette butts. The overweight and balding Simmons smoked a Havana cigar, leaning lazily against the steel bars that encased the room's windows. A band of light streaked through, partially covering Simmons between a layer of thick, acrid smoke. Carl Ryan slid over a chair next to Amy and straddled it as if positioning himself onto a horse's back. Further questioning began. Another half hour passed. Each question led to a dead end. The two cops released Amy from the station. "I think we'll have to keep an eye on her," said Simmons as he stumped out his third cigar into the ashtray, forcing other butts over the side. "I think so," replied Ryan. The 10-minute ride in Montano's limo felt like an eternity to Terry. His thumb still throbbing with pain, his nervous system had adjusted to the numbness of the flattened mess. Castle Heights, Long Beach was just a few minutes' ride from Ventura Beach. A shady turnoff from Route 5 gave way to a pebble-dashed driveway that snaked to the front of the giant wrought iron gates. Beyond the gates lay another path about 15 yards from Montano's domain. The gates opened automatically, and slowly the limo cruised in. Montano sat beside Terry while Chino drove in. Not a word had been spoken since the journey had begun. The limo stopped outside the doors to the mansion. A flight of stone steps lay before the thick wooden doors. Terry was pushed with force up the steps toward the doors by Chino, almost toppling over unexpectedly as they entered the mansion. A further flight of stairs awaited him, which led to a first-floor landing. The steps, floor, and walls were all made from marble. Still being shoved along, Terry was led into a large room at the top of the landing and flung into a thick leather chair and taped once again. The room was an office of some kind. Sparkling white ceramic floor, 12 TV monitors filled a large portion of the left wall. Surveillance of Montano's entire mansion. There was an array of porcelain ornaments and a few paintings from Monet's collection. A large glass window with a view to a giant fresh green lawn was positioned behind his table and chair. He sat and looked across at Terry. Feverishly standing to each side of Terry were two of his henchmen. On his left was Sammy Sugin, alias Snakes. To his right, Lou Malin, alias Fingers. These two characters had been hired by Montano back in '85 from the streets of Medellin, Colombia, during the years of business with the Martinez family, the vicious mob from Antioquia, big hitters that own most of Colombia's extortion trade. Snakes was given his name from the way he whacked guys for Montano, nailing them into a wooden crate and sending in a couple of cobras. If that didn't do the job, then Fingers would take over with his wire cutters, cutting away and leaving the unfortunate to bleed to death. These guys were not to be fucked with. Their sick work did not please Montano. Every hit that he had arranged would be for business, not a pleasure thing. These guys got a kick out of it. But at the end of the day, the job was being done, so Montano left them to it. The last deal was with Martinez for 50 kilos of coke. They met in the middle of Warner Range Desert, just past the border into Smoke Creek, Route 395, Reno. The limos cruised from different directions to a prearranged meeting point, slap bang in the dusty flat land. The crisp, blondish sand of the desert floor gave a combined crackle and scrape sound as the wheels of both limos came together to a halt. With a distance of around 5 feet between the two limos, the quiet purr of the engines ceased. A soft whistle of wind and a piece of desert tumbleweed rolled by. The click of both limo doors opening invaded the silence as Martinez and Montano alighted from the vehicles with synchronicity. Both of them wore very similar clothing, knee-length leather coats and dark Ray-Ban sunglasses to complete the image. Shaking hands between the engines of the limos, Montano then signaled Snakes to bring over the silver briefcase from the passenger seat. Snakes placed the case on the hood of the limo. Martinez nodded in the direction of his driver, and immediately a dark and burly man placed a black case next to the other. Both cases were now opened. The silver case contained a substantial amount of money, while the black case held a copious amount of pure cocaine. "How's business?" said Montano, looking directly into the eyes of Martinez, disregarding his interest in the contents of the case. "Good, very good. And yourself?" replied Martinez. "Fine. Do I need to test the coke?" said Montano, nonchalantly speaking. "Now why would you say something like that? After all these years, you come out with something like that? I find that a little disrespectful, Don Montano." "My apologies," said Montano. Each of the cases was now closed, exchanged, and placed into the relevant vehicles via the help. "Well, I'll be moving along now. People to see, places to go," said Montano, placing a hand onto Martinez's shoulder before turning to leave. Returning to the limos, the engine started up once more. In the limo of Don Montano, friendly facial expression turned to sheer disgust. The explosion gave the sound of one enormous thump. Martinez's limo fired in all directions, leaving all the heavy parts of the vehicle engulfed in flames where it lay. Door panels, hood, and trunk scattered across the blonde landscape of the desert. The three men, including Martinez, were not visible from Montano's view. There was enough time on the preset C4 timed explosive, which Chino had placed inside the wheel arch of Martinez's limo earlier that morning. Martinez never missed an arranged appointment with Montano. The limo was always Martinez's first choice of travel. It would have been rare and unfortunate for Martinez to turn up in some other vehicle. Montano tilted his head slightly and nodded to himself approvingly to the Martinez hit. Chino drove the limo steadily, as though nothing had happened. Tom Vincent, the guy with the missing head, had been working with Martinez one night while Tony Chino dined with his wife at Ramirez's restaurant, a popular place where most of the mob guys ate. This time, Chino was treating his wife on their wedding anniversary. With Chino being a well-feared man in the business he was in, his wife somehow wore the pants. Half an hour into their main course, in walked Martinez and Vincent, sitting directly behind Chino. He was about to pay his respects to the pair, until he overheard Vincent's conversation. "So Montano's bitch was all over me. I'm thinking, what the fuck is going on here? So Montano goes to take another piss after we sit down from the dance floor, and guess what?" said Vincent. "What?" replied Martinez. "She pulls out my fucking cock there and then, and starts chewing on it under the table," said Vincent proudly. "What a fucking whore," said Martinez. "You're telling me the cheek of the bitch, right under his fucking nose." "Jesus, How you kept a straight face after Montano finished his piss, I'll never know, grinned Martinez. Let me tell you, it was difficult. When Montano got back, his wife put a wet kiss smack bang on his lips, fucking tongues and all, bragged Vincent. Oh, Jesus. Martinez started to laugh hysterically and Vincent joined in. Chino put a bundle of dollars onto the table and took hold of his wife's arm. She was oblivious to the conversation what had just taken place, as she had just returned from the ladies' room. Quickly passing Martinez and Vincent, Chino picked their coats from the concierge, headed out of the doors and into a waiting cab, and headed straight for the Flamingo Club, to let the Don hear what he had just heard. Terry's thumb was now a large lump of mashed flesh, and coated in a thick, dark blob of congealed blood. The pain had now subsided, just a throbbing numbness now remained. If your friend don't show soon, we take a ride into the desert, said Montano casually. Terry was again taped at the mouth, unable to respond. Sipping a large Jack Daniels and puffing on a large Cuban cigar, Montano stared at Terry, observing him between an uncomfortable silence. Terry turned his head slightly toward a metallic clock hanging from the left wall. The time was 3:40 p.m. Dillon was due at 4 p.m. After 19 minutes of hallucinogenic hysteria, the clock reached 3:59 p.m. At exactly 4 p.m., a small red light indicated on a thick black office phone situated on top of Montano's desk. Montano picked it up and spoke just one word into it, then placed the handset back into its cradle. He stood upright, groaned, and rolled his head around his shoulders one turn before speaking the words to Chino. "Bring him up," said Montano. Terry was uplifted with a sense of hope. Adrenaline raced through his body. Chino headed out of Montano's office door to bring Dillon to the patiently awaiting Dawn. He alighted from the blue Escort he'd arrived in. The cash and documents lay in the trunk of the vehicle. Dillon was met at the front of the mansion doors just as he was about to push the Sonnet. Chino stared at Dillon and motioned with a sweep of his hand to enter the mansion. He did so, cautiously. Chino closed the door and pointed him up the stairwell. Dillon advanced with Chino close behind him. On reaching the top of the stairs, Chino passed by Dillon and opened the door to Montano's office. He and Chino entered the office. Chino closed the door behind them. Glancing around, Dillon noticed Terry, his eyes fixated onto Dillon's. He looked terrified, taking his eyes away from Terry and toward Montano as he sat motionless with the two Cuban-looking guys at his side. Chino made his way to stand next to the Cubans. "Where are they?" said Montano, his elbows now resting on the table and the fingertips of both hands joined together, forming a peak. "First things first," breathed Dillon nervously. Terry closed his eyes and mumbled at Dillon's answer, tilting his head to one side. His taped mouth stopped him from hurling a barrage of abuse to the wrong answer Dillon had given. "I need one answer to the next question, and I'll give you the papers," demanded Dillon. "I'm getting pretty fucking sick of your silly games," cried Montano aggressively whilst grinding his chair backward. Standing upright, he pulled a .357 Magnum from his table drawer and pointed it in the direction of Dillon. He held his hands in the air, motioning a surrender. As this was happening, a blacked-out Escalade pulled up outside of Montano's main gates to the mansion. 5 FBI and a 6-man SWAT team jumped out. 2 on each side of the gates covered a member of the team whilst he blew the lock on the center of the gate with a small C4 charge. The gates were kicked open and the team made a dash up the driveway to the main doors of the house. There was a huge crashing sound. The doors to the mansion were off the hinges. Thrown into the hallway were 2 flashbangs as the SWAT team made a dash for the upstairs office to Montano. Outside of the gates to Montano's mansion, 2 Jeep Cherokees pulled up rapidly. Jumping from the jeeps were Manzano Castillo with 6 other men dressed in dark clothing and sunglasses. Manzano Castillo was the supplier of cocaine to Martinez, and after hearing about what Montano had done to him, he wasn't too pleased. The men ran up the drive toward the doors to Montano's mansion, unaware of the FBI who had just stormed the building. The moment the FBI reached the doors to Montano's office, he was already prepared. The security cameras had given him the chance to get ready for war. Tipping his desk onto its side, he ripped off an M16 that was taped to the underside. His paperwork, telephone, a magnum, and a 9mm handgun spilled to the floor as Montano positioned himself behind the desk, his M16 trained on the doors of the office. Snakes, Fingers, and Chino positioned themselves behind alternative furniture, all of them prepared with submachine guns. In the few seconds that this was taking place, Terry shuffled nervously around on his chair, of which he was taped to. He was in a direct line of fire between the office door and Montano. Dillon, already laying low on the floor, pulled Terry, tipping over the chair just as fire was exchanged between the feds and Montano's guys. The sound of gunfire was deafening. Dillon set Terry free from the chair. He picked up the 9mm that had fallen from Montano's desk. The SWAT team were now inside Montano's spacious office and were firing from behind a drinks bar. Dillon and Terry made a scramble to the doors of the office. Manzano Castillo led the 6 Colombians up the stairs. Dillon and Terry had no choice but to jump the balcony to avoid more gunfire. The sound of splitting wood, windows breaking, filled the mansion. Dillon and Terry made their way out of the main doors into the escort Dillon had arrived in. The wheels spun as they set off down the driveway, past the gates, and off toward the highway. Chino and Snakes managed to hurl themselves behind the thick desk that Montano lay behind.
"Get your asses up and take out these motherfuckers!"
screamed Montano to Snakes, Fingers, and Chino. Another flashbang rolled toward the desk. Montano turned and made a jump through the smashed windows that faced the lawn. Chino and Fingers sprayed the machine guns toward the SWAT, taking 3 of them in the chest, knocking them backward out of the office doors and over the landing rail. They were wearing vests. The shots were stopped, but the drop backwards over the rail proved fatal. The rest of the SWAT team that remained pumped a hail of bullets through both Chino and Snakes before they could make the same jump as Montano. The bullets ripped into their backs and through their skulls, dropping them like a sack of potatoes. The shooting ceased. Manzano and his men waited patiently and confused as to what was happening outside the office doors. Manzano signaled everyone in through the front door and up to the office. Manzano and his men slowly marched into the thick, smoky room. The shooting started once more from the SWAT team, taking out Manzano and his men. Manzano, who was now riddled with bullets, reached inside of his jacket and pulled a grenade. With the last bit of strength left in him, he pulled the pin and threw it in the direction of the unsuspecting FBI and SWAT. Flames and debris ripped through the large window and onto the lawn that Montano had jumped onto. Montano turned the keys in the ignition, floored the accelerator, and made his way through the gates of the mansion. The windscreen to the Porsche had been smashed. Glass fell onto the legs of Montano. He took his eyes from the road to brush the splints from his legs. Returning his eyes to the road, a guy on a motorcycle rode into the path of him, causing Montano to swerve, hitting a fire hydrant and into the window of a 7-Eleven store, bringing the Porsche to a complete halt. The airbag deflated and Montano came round from a moment of unconsciousness. The front of the store was a tangled mess. The shop owner was knocked straight into a glass refrigerator, covered in milk and his own blood.
"Jesus, man, are you okay?"
said the man as he pulled his motorcycle over. Montano looked at the man, got out of the smashed Porsche, and with hatred, slammed a bloody fist into his nose, sending him sprawling into a rack of Time Life magazines. Montano headed toward the motorcycle that had caused the mess. The security alarm to the 7-Eleven stopped ringing as it crashed onto the truck of the wrecked Porsche. The security alarm to the 7-Eleven stopped ringing as it crashed onto the trunk of the wrecked Porsche. He swung himself lazily onto the bike and turned the bunch of keys in the ignition. The key fobs jammed between the shroud and the handlebar clamp. He furiously snapped off the bunch, leaving the ignition key stuck in, and threw them toward the bewildered crowd. Starting the bike, Montano dropped the gears and moved off speedily in the direction of Dillon and Terry. The bunch of keys jangled and slid across the road towards a child, who picked them up. A keychain in leather binding spelled the name, Dillon. Dillon and Terry took the highway onto Route 72 and followed the signposts for Escondido, which would take them down to Mexico. This route was usually pretty clear. Not many state police ventured this way.
Can you tell me what the hell was going on back there? Did you bring the feds with you?
Said Terry, nursing his thumb. They didn't come with me, said Dillon impassively. The road ahead seemed everlasting. Vast amounts of sandy, dry, open landscape lay beside both sides of the car. A cool breeze filled the interior and whistled gently as both Dillon and Terry cruised on. Terry reached for his jacket in the back seat. The beatings Terry had taken gave him a sense of fever and cold feelings through his body. He rested it over his shoulders. "Where's the money?" said Terry. "Don't worry, it's in the trunk," said Dillon. Terry took the 9mm from his lap and placed it in the footwell of the car. He then leaned back and closed his eyes. The car stereo was playing the song War by Edwin Starr. Dillon turned the car onto Route 73. The signpost on the left read, Mexico, 50 miles. "Jesus, what is it with me and cars?" said Dillon, forcing the gear stick with a crunch into fourth gear.
Well, if you weren't so rough with it, just take it slowly, slide it in and don't ram it. It's a similar action you take when you're with a nice lady,
mocked Terry sarcastically. Dillon smiled at Terry's comment. The music was interrupted by a news bulletin. "A live report is coming from ZBC News just outside of a convenience store down in Palm Springs. Over to you, Harry." The radio news reporter's voice crossed over to the sound of sirens in the background as a ZBC spokesperson gave the report. "Around 30 minutes ago, the scene I am witnessing here was a lot less devastating than it is now. What seems to be the wreckage of this high-powered sports car is supposedly the vehicle that belongs to the high-flying multimillionaire, Don Pablo Montano." Dillon lost the steering on the car for a second, but brought it back steady. His heart thumped as he listened to the news. He looked over to Terry, who was now reclined in his seat and sleeping soundly. "This terrible scene of carnage, I am told by eyewitnesses, explains how the vehicle lost control, swerving from a motorcycle and careening into this 7-Eleven store. Don Montano is said to have fled from the scene seconds after—" "Great. Just great," shouted Dillon, pushing the power button off on the stereo, waking Terry in the process.
"This Montano guy is fucking unbelievable. He's managed to escape from the gunfight at the OK Corral. Now he's gonna be on our asses again,"
yelled Dillon, holding one hand to his forehead, nodding in disbelief. Terry reached into his top pocket and pulled out a small plastic baggie with a copious amount of white powder in it.
"Relax, he's nowhere near us," said Terry.
"What's that shit you've got there?" said Dillon. Before Terry could answer, he'd already snorted a large pile of the dust off the barrel of the 9mm pistol. "I think it's coke. I found it on the floor when I was knocked over in the chair."
"Yep, it's coke all right,"
said Terry, his eyes bulging from the hit.
"Give me that shit,"
said Dillon, snatching the bag from Terry's hand. He threw it out of the window. The bag vanished out of sight.
"Dillon, you fucking asshole."
"Listen, Terry, you brainless prick. We've got to keep our heads straight if we're to make it through this shit," yelled Dillon. "Fucking killjoy," said Terry, pulling a cigarette from his pocket. A sign at the side of the road read, "Next gas station, 200 meters." Dillon looked at the fuel gauge. The needle on the dial was slightly bouncing over the empty mark. "We're gonna have to pull in at the next station," said Dillon, in a matter-of-fact tone. "Whatever," replied Terry, still pissed at what Dillon had done with the coke. "Fuck this goddamn car," said Dillon, wrestling with the gear lever once more. Dropping the car into a low gear, he slowed down and turned onto the forecourt of the gas station, coming to a halt at the side of the pump marked unleaded. Chapter 11. Amy made her way back down the corridor the same way she came in. She had spoken with the doctor, and he had reassured her that Peter was okay. Just a few broken bones, but he was stable. He would be able to check out himself in a day or two. The doctor said he was now only waiting on the brain scan results. This was normal procedure in every concussion injury. Amy's mind was now at ease with Peter's condition. Her attention shifted to finding that little shit of a brother. The hospital's automatic doors made a hiss sound as they opened. They slid back fast, then slowed quickly as they came to the end of the runners. Amy waited as a stretcher case was wheeled in, followed by an array of casualties, ranging from bleeding heads to limping legs. She managed to make her way through the human carnage and onto the hospital through road. At the same time, Salty pulled up in his cab. "Get in," said Salty.
What are you doing here?
Said Amy. "I'll explain in a minute, just get in," replied Salty. Amy pulled open the cab door and got in. Salty made his way out of the hospital grounds, setting a course for Amy's house. "All hell's broke loose in the last 24 hours, Amy. It's totally crazy. I've got to tell you something about Dillon."
I already know, Andy, said a saddened Amy.
"You do? How?" said Andy, slightly confused.
Peter told me. He recognized Dillon in Terry's voice. He also heard him call his name. Why has he done this, Andy? Why has he been so stupid?
Said Amy with anger in her voice. She batted down hard onto the dashboard with a clenched fist, then cupped her eyes and sobbed.
Why?
Amy whimpered to herself. Salty ran a friendly hand across Amy's shoulders. "I have something for you from Dillon," said Salty as he turned the corner onto Moss View.
What?
"I'll give it to you once we get to your house. I want these bastards behind us to see anything suspicious," said Salty. Amy turned to look out of the back windscreen and saw the black sedan that was following her this morning on the way to the hospital. The two cops, Ryan and Simmons, were still on Amy's case like a pair of lapdogs. 5 hours in that goddamn police station, trying their best to pin that robbery shit on me," said Salty.
You didn't say anything, did you?
Replied Amy. "I didn't say a thing, but how long do you think that's gonna last? They ain't gonna give up. It's not like he has just stole a candy bar, you know, Amy," said Salty angrily.
I know, but I need to get to him before they do, replied Amy.
Salty pulled into Amy's driveway. The sedan drove past, U-turned, and parked on the opposite side of the street.
Amy and Salty both got out of the cab. Amy waved to the cops sarcastically. The cops made no return gesture. She threw the front door keys to the house onto the glass coffee table. The keys slid along and stopped against the large fruit bowl in the center. She slumped down, exhausted, onto her leather sofa and let out a stressful sigh. "Here," said Salty, as he pulled an envelope from the inside of his jacket, handing it to Amy as he sat down next to her. Amy looked puzzled.
What is it?
"I don't know, Amy. I took it from Dillon on orders to give it to you if things went wrong." Amy tore open the envelope, pulled out the paper, then paused a second before reading it.
So you knew what he was doing, Salty?
Quizzed Amy. "Yeah, but..."
Oh, for Christ's sakes, Andy, why didn't you stop him? Of all people, I thought you might have been able to talk some sense into him, she yelled.
"Listen, Amy, don't you think that I tried? He wouldn't listen to me. He seemed too determined so I could do nothing more. I just hoped that he would wake up the next day to another one of his get-rich-quick schemes. All I can say is that I'm sorry that I couldn't do anything to help him, Amy. I'm sorry for having to go at you. Dillon's got his own mind. He should know better," said Salty, in an apologetic tone. Amy unfolded the crisp piece of paper that was inside of the envelope. Salty walked to the living room window and pulled aside the curtain and watched as the black sedan sped off. He turned back to Amy, who was now wiping her eyes with a Kleenex, the paper now folded and clasped between her two hands. She put down the paper onto the table and headed toward the mahogany drinks cabinet behind the sofa. She pulled 2 large brandy glasses from the cabinet and a bottle of scotch.
Want one?
She said, already pouring into the glasses.
Yeah, I think I need one.
Salty picked up the paper from the table. Sitting down onto the sofa, he began to read it. Dear Amy, if you're reading this now, then things have not gone according to plan. One of 2 things has happened. Either I'm dead, or I'm far away from West Point. I can't begin to explain what made me do what I've done, but if I make it through all this shit, I'll explain what I'm gonna do when things cool off. All I can say for now is that I'm sorry for being a total fuck-up in this family and causing so much trouble. I hope that you can understand the pressure that I've been going through lately, and that I love you. Mom and Dad will always be in my heart, whatever the outcome. So take care, little sister, and goodbye for now. Amy slumped onto the sofa next to Salty, passed him his drink, and began to cry onto his shoulder. Salty put down the letter and pulled Amy in tight, taking a sip of the scotch, which warmed the back of his throat instantly. He began to stare hypnotically into the light brown liquid in the glass, before closing his eyes in deep thought.
God damn it,
cried Simmons at Ryan as he yanked the steering wheel of the black sedan off the sidewalk outside of Roy's Donuts, causing Simmons to spill his coffee onto his lap. Sorry, Sid, but we gotta get back to headquarters.
There's no need to rush. The chief gave us no specific time. Jesus, you want to slow down a little? Your 100 miles an hour lifestyle gives my heart the jitters,
said Simmons, ramming the last bite of a frosted sugar donut into his meaty mouth. All that cholesterol is what's causing the jitters. You want to cut back a little? When you feel like stuffing yourself with all that shit, why don't you just smoke on another cigar and put a little extra pressure on the lungs instead? Ryan laughed at his own sarcasm.
Ha, hardy ha,
mocked Simmons, placing the half cup of coffee in the cup holder on the dashboard. He screwed up the empty, brown, clown-faced bag which held the frosted donuts.
What did he say?
Said Simmons. Who? Said Ryan.
The chief.
Ryan shrugged his shoulders. Not much, just that we had to get back to HQ for a briefing. Probably another case. You know how he likes to load us up with plenty of work?
Yeah, true enough,
said Simmons. Ryan pulled against the sidewalk slowly and neatly outside of the station. Killing the engine, he pulled his jacket from the back seat, straightened his blonde side parting, and alighted from the sedan. He threw his jacket over his left shoulder, exposing the magnum in his gun belt. They headed up the stairs from the station's entrance. Simmons was slow to follow, shifting his heavy weight from the passenger seat, slamming the sedan door, and brushing off the donut dust from his tie. The station was buzzing with the usual arrests. Simmons eyed up a hooker who was being checked in at the front desk by 2 uniformed officers. She looked back at Simmons in disgust, chewing on some gum. They walked through the investigation room where other officers were engrossed in piles of paperwork. Ryan knocked the door to Chief Montgomery's office. The chief pushed aside the paperwork he was studying, tilted his half-lens reading glasses, and waved them in. Ryan and Simmons strolled into the plush office. Police diplomas hung from the wall behind the chief. Everything was neatly arranged. "Afternoon, men, and how is work handling?" said Montgomery, sternly. "Fine, we are closer than you think on the case, Chief," said Ryan. "Good. Well, that's what I have brought you over for." "I'm gonna have to take you off the case," said the Chief.
"Oh, why's that?"
said Simmons. Montgomery lay back in his leather recliner, took off his glasses, and laid them on the desk in front of him. "I got a message about an hour ago from the FBI in California. They tell me that they know the suspect, and it won't be long before they bring him down here. Now, I don't know whether they have him in custody, but his name is Dillon Thomas. Knew it all along, said Simmons unsurprisingly. Anyway, they tell me as soon as they have some more news, they'll let me know, said the chief.
So what do we do now, boss? Said Ryan.
Well, boys, Montgomery stood and walked between Ryan and Simmons toward the glass-paneled office door and opened it. Until then, you two guys are granted a few days' holiday. As soon as I get some news, I'll call you straight away. Me, I have a lot of work to do, so why don't you two guys go home and take your lovely wives shopping, or anything else that rings your bell, said Montgomery, ushering the two cops through his office door.
Am I dreaming, or did the chief just say that we could have a few days off? Said Ryan.
He did. And I don't know about you, but I'm off to Phil's wine bar for a few well-deserved drinks. What do you say? Gestured Simmons.
Ryan acknowledged with a smile and a nod. Making their way to the exit of the station, they passed the check-in desk once more, where the hooker still stood, arguing some point to the arresting officer. Simmons slapped her on her ass. As she turned, Simmons pointed the blame on Ryan. Ryan blew her a kiss before exiting the station. Chapter 12. Dillon twisted the ignition keys in the Ford, killing the engine. He turned in his seat to face Terry.
Okay, I'm gonna go clean myself up a little. I feel like shit. I suggest you do the same.
You look how I feel, said Dillon.
Yeah, said Terry, as Dillon got out of the Ford and walked slowly toward the restroom.
He's starting to really get on my nerves, whispered Terry to himself, as he reclined his seat into a laid-back position once more. Gusts of wind lashed against Dillon's ears. Clouds of dust blew around here and there on the desolate strip of highway behind him, home to the gas station where they had stopped. He felt the staring of eyes. He turned his head towards the station's attendant, who was indeed looking Dillon's way. He increased the speed of his step and pushed open the weather-beaten restroom door. The room was cool, badly lit but quite clean, apart from the graffiti-covered cubicles, one of which was out of order, the other two were vacant. He turned the tap on the first of the 3 steel wash basins. The pipes churned before spitting out the cold water onto Dillon's blood-stained hands. He cupped the water and splashed vigorously the cool liquid onto his grubby face. He sighed as he dragged his hands down over the bags under his eyes, staring blankly into the mirror over the basin. Terry was startled from his relaxed state to the old service station attendant tapping on the window of the Ford. He nodded a yes to the question of whether he wanted premium gas. His nerves were on a knife's edge, as he was startled once more to the attendant thrusting the premium pump against the window to double-check that was what he had asked for.
Yes,
barked Terry, turning the knob of his seat as he positioned the seat in an upright position. As he tended to his wounded hand, wrapping the blood-soaked bandage a little tighter, he noticed the attendant staring curiously at him through the gap in the hood as he checked the oil. Terry moved the 9mm out of sight between his legs. He turned and looked behind, hearing an oncoming vehicle approaching. Adjusting the rear-view mirror to his advantage, he saw a motorcycle pulling up at the pump behind, which seemed quick to arrive. The new arrival turned off the engine to the growling motorcycle and kicked down the bike's stand. Swinging his leg over the bike, he made a few minor adjustments to his windswept clothing, brushing the highway dust from his full-length leather coat. Terry watched the guy walk toward the attendant. As he got closer, he noticed that this person was Don Montano. Sliding down his seat in hope that he would not be noticed, Terry heard Montano ask for the restroom. The assistant casually pointed the way. Terry lifted his hand toward the side of his face as he tried to cover himself not to be seen. He watched through the side of his fingers at Montano walking with a slight limp as if in slow motion toward the restroom. He had about 3 seconds to decide what to do before Montano entered the restroom on an unexpected Dillon. Would he take the chance, stay still where he was, and hope that Dillon had heard the motorcycle arrive, looked and seen who it was?
or take Montano down himself quickly with the 9mm he had stuffed between his legs. The thinking was over. Montano had made the choice for him. He slammed the hood shut and walked over to the pump, which was now signaling that the fuel tank was full by a ringing of a bell. Montano stood 2 feet in front of the Ford with his arms extended, holding a .44 Magnum. But before Montano could take a shot, Terry had put one round through the windshield, which pierced through Montano's leather coat and into his left shoulder. The thud of the 9mm bullet sent Montano staggering backwards.
Okay, you motherfucker, let's see you get out of this one,
shouted Terry in a nervous panic. Lifting up his legs, he booted out the shattered windshield, letting off 2 more rounds. Montano, still reeling a little from the shot to his shoulder, randomly fired off 3 shots to the bodywork of the Ford. By this time, the attendant had made his way out of the firing zone and across the dusty road at the side of the service station. One of the shots Montano had let off ripped through the right-hand wing of the Ford, tearing into the interior of the car and into Terry's thigh. He screamed with pain and flung his head back against the seat. Montano lined up his next shot. Terry aimed for another shot. It was too late. Montano had fired the kill shot straight into Terry's forehead. The back of his head exploded, covering the back seats of the Ford with bone and flesh. A lit cigarette that Terry was holding dropped out of the passenger door, which he had opened to make a quick escape. It ignited the excess petrol on the floor next to the pump. This, in turn, ignited the inside of the Ford.
The blast from the explosion caused Montano, staggered, heading to the door of the restroom, to fall to the floor.
"Don't move 1 fucking inch," growled Dillon, pointing the barrel of a PP-7 toward Montano. He stared at Dillon with revolt. Dillon pulled the trigger. "Jesus, look at the fucking mess you've made now," shouted Dillon as he viewed the devastation outside of the restroom. "Why couldn't you have just left us alone? Why couldn't you have just taken the papers and leave us? You have enough money, you selfish bastard. Look at the state of Terry. Look what you've done," screamed Dillon, hysterically kicking Montano in the ribs. He exhaled rapidly. Clearly winded, he clutched his chest with both hands. The blood, from his gunshot wound to his lower abdomen, trickled slowly onto the restroom tiles. Dillon crouched down, placing his back against one of the toilet cubicles, holding his forehead with one hand. His other rested loosely on his knee with the gun trained on Montano's head. "You better decide what you're gonna do. The cops are gonna be here soon," said Montano, with an edge of pain in his voice. "Shut up. Shut the fuck up, you murdering bastard," screamed Dillon as he thrust the gun into Montano's cheek. Dillon stood and walked to the restroom door, viewing the carnage. The damage seemed quite small compared to the bank's mess. The service station attendant, Joe, was spraying the car and the surrounding area with an extinguisher to no avail. It was lit up good. Miraculously, the fuel pumps were still intact and not in flames. "Okay, asshole, now you don't fucking move. Drop the weapon, big shot." Montano's voice gave Dillon a terrible sinking feeling. This time, he could feel it was over. "Drop it!" yelled Montano. The clink of hard metal slammed onto the tiles of the restroom floor. "Now walk forward." Montano struggled to his feet and jammed the Magnum, that had been concealed under his right leg after the fall, into Dillon's spine. He walked Dillon out of the restroom. "Stop!" shouted Montano, as they both reached the middle of the forecourt. "Go over to the car and bring me the dough and the papers before the lock goes up," said Montano calmly. Dillon walked cautiously around to the trunk of the Ford and stood about a foot away. Montano followed and stood beside him. "Right. Open it," said Montano, prodding Dillon forward with the Magnum. By this time, the flames from inside the Ford were beginning to lick against the back windshield. "It's locked," said Dillon. "And the keys?" replied Montano. "In the ignition." said Dillon, sarcastically, pointing towards the driver's side. You, get over here quick, shouted Montano to Joe, the gas station attendant, who had remained silent and frightened at the side of the road. Holding the fire extinguisher, Joe ran over quickly. Go and get me a crowbar and do it fast, growled Montano. Joe ran off to get what Montano had ordered. Dillon looked behind to see where the motorcycle was. Where did you pick up the bike? Looks suspiciously like mine, said Dillon, trying to make some kind of conversation. Off a friend that I bumped into. No more questions, said the Don, jabbing the magnum into Dillon's back once more. Jesus, calm down with that thing, will you? Gestured Dillon in a painful way. Joe returned, handing the crowbar to Dillon after Montano had instructed him to do so. Joe was told to spray the inside of the Ford with the extinguisher. The white foam covered every part of the car before running out. The flames still raged. Now open it quick before this goes up, yelled Montano. Dillon slammed the flat end of the bar under the lock of the trunk and grasped the hooked end of the bar. Leveling it up and down, the trunk gave way, springing upward with a squeak. There lay 4 duffel bags and the rest of Montano's papers. There's your goddamn papers, and the money with it. Happy now? Said Dillon. Montano made no reply to Dillon's comment, but anxiously reached in for the papers, taking his attention completely off Dillon and Joe. In an instant, the fire extinguisher that Joe was holding came down onto the back of Montano's head with a great thud. He slumped face down into the trunk. His head began to bleed profusely onto the tax documents. He twitched for a few seconds before becoming completely still. Dillon looked at Joe, bemused. Joe shrugged his shoulders, looking quite shocked at his own reaction to what he had done. I thought that it was the right thing to do. You seem like the good guy in all this mess. Is he dead? Asked Joe. I think so, replied Dillon softly under his breath. What are we going to do now? Said Joe. Dillon looked up the road ahead, and then to the motorcycle Montano had rode in on. His motorcycle. He was baffled as to how it fell into the hands of the Don, standing in thought for a few seconds while Joe wiped sweat from his brow with an oily hand. Well, said Dillon, pausing briefly with a squint of his eye, examining the name tag on Joe's overalls. Well, Joe, I suggest that you make up some believable story as to what went on here today. You didn't see me here, and I didn't see you put that fire extinguisher onto our friend's head here, said Dillon with conviction. Dillon pulled one of the duffel bags from underneath Montano's lifeless body, unzipped it, and began stuffing a spare, large rucksack that lay in the trunk with cash from one of the 4 bags. Joe stood beside Dillon speechless and in total shock from the events that had just passed. Dillon's bag now packed, he had managed to fill the rucksack with 2 of the cash bags, leaving 2 left, one with the papers and one with more cash. Joe had just arrived with another extinguisher. He managed to quell the flames. Dillon zipped the rucksack shut with a little difficulty and threw it over his shoulder, placing his arms through the handles. I'd say there's about $250,000 left over for you there, Joe. I suggest that you take it and move up south for the winter. After all, I think you deserve it for saving my ass. It's no good to my friend there anymore. He's burnt out, said Dillon, turning and heading toward the bike behind him. Thanks, mister, said Joe. Dillon straddled the bike, turned the keys in the ignition. He twisted the accelerator. The motorcycle kicked up a cloud of dust, engulfing Joe, who was now walking with the duffel bags in hand. Dillon blasted up the dusty road with no destination set.